For most of human history, we believed ourselves to be alone, singular, exceptional, the sole heirs of an ancient world long lost to time. Our story was told as a straight line, a quiet progression from primitive beginnings toward the complex, reflective beings we are today. But as science continues peeling back the layers of our deep past, a different picture emerges, one far richer, stranger, and more haunting than anything we once imagined. Beneath the surface of our familiar human timeline lies an invisible web of connections, forgotten encounters, and vanished species whose names, faces, and voices have been swallowed by time. Yet they are not entirely gone. Their presence lingers in the shadows of our genomes, like faint fingerprints pressed into the very structure of who we are. This is where the idea of a ghost species begins, a lineage of ancient humans for which no skull has been found, no jawbone exhumed, no campsite uncovered. And yet, somehow, they persist, mapped not by archaeologists with brushes, but by geneticists tracing anomalies in our DNA. These spectral ancestors remain hidden, not because they never walked the earth, but because the earth has swallowed nearly every trace of their existence. Still, their echoes continue to whisper through us. Among these unknown lineages, one has captured scientific and philosophical curiosity more intensely than the rest, the mysterious figure we call Ancestor X. Ancestor X is not a name given from discovery, it is a name born from absence. It represents a population of ancient humans who lived, thrived, and eventually disappeared without leaving behind the physical evidence we rely on to understand prehistory. Their story exists only in the negative space of the fossil record, emerging from mathematical models and unexpected genetic signatures in modern humans. To many, this might seem like too little to build meaning from. But to those who study human evolution, absence itself is a clue, a puzzle piece that forces us to question what else we are still blind to. This prologue invites you to step into that darkness, to peer into a world where facts meet intuition, where the edges of science blur into imagination. It is a journey not just through time, but into uncertainty, an exploration of what it means to share your identity with ancestors you will never fully know. And in doing so, it challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that human history is something stable, documented, and understood. In truth, much of it remains hidden under layers of chance and erosion. The earth does not keep a perfect memory. It buries stories, snaps bones, scatters remains, and erases entire species from view. What survives is often accidental, fragile, incomplete. As we venture into this narrative, imagine the world hundreds of thousands of years ago. Imagine forests stretching across continents, unbroken by roads or cities. Imagine vast grasslands where early humans walked in small, scattered groups, unaware that their existence would one day shape the future of an entire planet. In that world, we were not alone. There were others, other humans, with their own languages, fears, cultures, and dreams. Some we know, Neanderthals with powerful builds and complex societies, Denisovans, mysterious giants of genetics, and smaller, island-dwelling species like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis. Each one a branch on a sprawling evolutionary tree. But Ancestor X stood among them, unseen but impactful, leaving behind no bones, only whispers woven into the double helix. It is a strange feeling to consider that your own body carries the remnants of someone who lived and died in total anonymity, someone who existed outside the maps we draw of human origins. Stranger still is the realization that they are part of you, influencing traits, shaping biology, contributing to the tapestry of humanity in ways we are only beginning to uncover. This invisible lineage forces us to widen our lens, to imagine a world more crowded, more interconnected, and far more complex than the simple diagrams we grew up with. Yet this story is not just scientific, it is deeply emotional. Because in searching for Ancestor X, we confront questions about belonging, memory, and loss. Who gets remembered in history? Who gets forgotten? And what does it mean when the forgotten still live within us? There is a kind of poetry in it, a reminder that history is not only what survives in museums or textbooks, but also what endures in the quiet architecture of our cells. Even without fossils, these ancestors remain present in a way no extinction can fully erase. As we begin this journey, let your imagination soften the boundary between the known and the unknown. Picture the world as it was, vast, wild, and filled with beings who resembled us yet were different in ways we may never fully grasp. Picture Ancestor X walking through that ancient landscape, their footsteps leaving impressions that time stole away, but whose biological essence continued forward. They are both lost and found, extinct yet alive within us, forgotten yet essential. This documentary will dive into what we know, what we suspect, and what remains hidden about this enigmatic lineage. It will trace the scientific discovery of ghost species, reconstruct possible lives from the faintest genetic clues, and explore the profound philosophical implications of sharing ancestry with beings we cannot name. And as we move deeper, one truth will become increasingly clear: the story of humanity is not the tale of one species rising in isolation, but of many species intertwined, merging, disappearing, leaving fragments of themselves inside the survivors. In the end, Ancestor X is more than a scientific mystery. They are a reminder of humility. A reminder that our past is larger than our knowledge, that evolution is richer than our reconstructions, and that the human story is still unfolding with every new discovery. Their shadow travels with us, not frightening, but haunting in the most wondrous sense of the word. And this journey begins by acknowledging that the ghosts of our past are not gone. They are within us, shaping who we are, guiding us to ask better questions, and pushing us to see humanity not as a single line, but as a constellation of vanished and surviving lights. If you'd like, I can now expand Section 2 or revise this to be even more cinematic, emotional, or scientifically dense. For more than a century, our understanding of human origins relied almost entirely on bones, hard, silent fragments of lives that ended tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Paleontologists brushed dust off jawlines, pieced skull fragments together, and filled museum shelves with reconstructions. It was slow work, delicate work, and for a long time, the fossil record felt like a stable guide to our past. But beneath this confidence lay a truth scientists quietly acknowledged: the fossil record is painfully incomplete. Entire species may have thrived, lived out their full evolutionary stories, and vanished again without leaving a single bone for us to find. And even when fossils did survive, time could easily scatter or crush them into anonymity. This realization becomes the doorway into one of the greatest puzzles of modern science: the discovery of Ancestor X through genetic ghosts rather than physical remains. The puzzle began as a faint irregularity, a whisper hidden deep within strands of human DNA. When scientists first sequenced the genomes of modern humans from different regions of the world, they expected patterns that reflected migration histories, famines, bottlenecks, and expansions. But they found something else: certain genetic sequences appeared too ancient, too divergent, and too unfamiliar to have originated from the known branches of the human family tree. These fragments didn't match Neanderthals. They didn't match Denisovans. They didn't match any species we had fossils for. Instead, they resembled the genetic footprint of an entirely different hominin, one that had lived alongside our ancestors long enough to leave descendants, but had somehow escaped every archaeological effort to uncover its bones. This anomaly, this ghostly imprint, was not a single mutation or a small quirk. It was a statistically clear and surprisingly large contribution to the genomes of some modern populations. It suggested interbreeding, shared environments, and deep contact. Yet, frustratingly, there were no bones in any cave, no tools in any layer of soil, no burnt hearth or footprint to explain who these people were. Science had stumbled upon a story with characters missing from the cast list. It was like reading a book and realizing whole chapters had been torn out, leaving only hints in the sentences that remained. The more researchers studied human genomes, the stranger the puzzle became. Geneticists relied on mathematical models, intricate systems that simulate evolutionary scenarios, calculate divergence times, and estimate population sizes. These models suggested that the DNA fragments in question were extremely old, branching off from the human lineage hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens appeared. But if that was true, where were the fossils? Why was there no physical evidence of such a lineage? The contrast between what the genes were saying and what the ground was offering created a tension that reshaped the field of human origins. The fossil record had always been lopsided. Fossils require an improbable set of perfect conditions to survive: rapid burial, minimal disturbance, the right environment. Most creatures that ever lived left no trace behind. Most human ancestors, especially those who lived in tropical environments where decay is rapid, may never fossilize at all. With this in mind, it becomes easier to understand how an entire species, an entire population, could live, migrate, encounter Homo sapiens, interbreed, and eventually disappear without leaving behind a single piece of recoverable bone. Yet knowing this logically did little to ease the emotional frustration of scientists who were now staring at evidence of a hominin that existed, interacted, and left a legacy, but remained physically invisible. There is something haunting about working with genetic data when no fossils exist to accompany it. A bone offers something tangible, a shape, a face, a sense of presence. DNA alone feels abstract, mathematical, like a voice speaking from behind a curtain. And yet, geneticists were able to piece together enough information to suggest that the ghost lineage they were detecting was not a small or rare population. It was widespread enough to leave traces in the genomes of modern humans in multiple regions. This meant Ancestor X was not a myth or a fluke, it was a real population that played a role in shaping who we are. What makes this puzzle even more compelling is how it challenges our inner narrative of human evolution. For so long, we imagined a sequence: Australopithecus led to Homo habilis, which led to Homo ergaster, which led to Homo erectus, and eventually to us. But the genetic signature of Ancestor X disrupts this linear story. It suggests that multiple species coexisted, intertwined, and influenced one another in ways we never fully appreciated. The missing pieces of the puzzle are not mistakes, they are evidence of a far more complex and braided evolutionary tapestry. As scientists dove deeper into the data, they found that these unknown genetic sequences were surprisingly resilient. Despite tens of thousands of years of recombination, which normally breaks down and scrambles ancient DNA fragments, some regions remained intact, passed across countless generations. These surviving fragments are like long-lost letters, folded into our biology, waiting to be deciphered. And yet, deciphering them requires imagining a species that left no footprints except the ones hidden inside our blood. This realization forces us to confront a new truth: bones and artifacts are not the final authority on human origins anymore. The genome has become a new archaeological landscape, a place where traces of ancient encounters lie buried, waiting to be uncovered by computers rather than shovels. Genetic archaeology has opened doors to histories we never knew existed, revealing that our ancestors shared their world with many others whose stories are still unfolding. Ancestor X represents the most enigmatic of these hidden histories. Unlike the Denisovans, whose story began with a single finger bone in a Siberian cave, Ancestor X has offered no physical evidence at all. Its existence is inferred entirely from the genetic shadows it cast on modern populations. This makes it both frustrating and exhilarating, a mystery that refuses to resolve itself, yet continually expands our understanding of what being human really means. The puzzle, then, is not just about missing bones. It is about missing knowledge, missing context, missing worlds. It challenges the boundary between what we think we know and what remains beyond our grasp. And in doing so, it sets the stage for a deeper exploration into how science, imagination, and humility work together to uncover the ancient truth of our species. Section 2 leaves us standing at the threshold. The clues are real, the evidence undeniable, yet the identity of Ancestor X remains hidden behind the veil of time. The puzzle is incomplete, and the missing pieces are not errors, they are invitations. Invitations to search further, question harder, and embrace the possibility that the human story is far larger than we ever believed. When we look at the world today, it feels natural to assume that humans have always been a singular species, Homo sapiens, one lineage spread across the globe. But this modern reality is a recent anomaly. For most of prehistory, the Earth was home to multiple kinds of humans living side by side, each shaped by different environments, challenges, and evolutionary pressures. To understand Ancestor X, we must first step into this earlier world, a world where humanity was not a single flame, but a constellation of different fires flickering across continents. Imagine the planet between 300,000 and 40,000 years ago. The Earth was restless, shifting through cycles of warmth and bitter cold. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Forests expanded and shrank. Deserts pulsed with life after rare storms, then returned to silence. In this ever-changing landscape, early humans adapted in unique ways, giving rise to a diversity that feels almost unimaginable today. Europe was the realm of the Neanderthals, robust, intelligent beings who crafted tools, controlled fire, buried their dead, and likely communicated through complex speech. Their bodies were shaped by ice and cold, their cultures by long winters and glacial winds. Farther east, Denisovans roamed the high plateaus and deep valleys of Asia. We know so little about their appearance that they feel like silhouettes in our imagination, yet their genetic legacy suggests they were a powerful and widespread lineage. Their DNA appears today in populations from Siberia to Southeast Asia to Oceania, implying they once thrived in an enormous geographic range. They adapted to altitudes that would cripple most modern humans, surviving in thin air where few others could. Everything we infer about them hints at resilience, resourcefulness, and mystery. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, a completely different branch of humans evolved in isolation on islands. Homo floresiensis, small-bodied, small-brained, yet surprisingly capable, inhabited the island of Flores for thousands of years. Their tools show precision. Their survival on an island with giant predators shows intelligence. Their existence challenges our assumptions about what a human can look like. A similar story unfolded in the Philippines with Homo luzonensis, another small-bodied species whose ancestry and development still puzzle researchers. And deep in South Africa, Homo naledi, an ancient hominin with a mosaic of primitive and advanced traits, survived long after they were expected to disappear, suggesting that evolution is rarely linear and never simple. All of these species, all of these adaptations, coexisted during overlapping periods. They hunted, gathered, cooked, raised children, explored, and invented solutions to the harsh challenges of their environments. They were not inferior versions of us. They were different expressions of the human blueprint, variations written by climate, geography, and time. In this vibrant evolutionary landscape, Homo sapiens emerged not as a lone protagonist, but as one character in a vast ensemble. This setting is crucial because Ancestor X lived somewhere within this crowded stage. They were not a rare glitch in the evolutionary story. They were part of this larger world of diversity, one more lineage shaped by forces of nature we can only partially reconstruct. Their absence from the fossil record doesn't make them less real, it simply places them among countless species whose bones never survived the relentless erosion of time. Yet their genetic signature tells us they were numerous enough, or socially connected enough, to leave a measurable imprint on our DNA today. To understand the significance of multiple human species sharing the planet, we must imagine what daily life might have felt like. Early humans would have moved through plains, forests, and mountains without knowing whether another species was a friend, a rival, or something in between. The presence of different humans shaped migrations, competition for resources, and even cultural innovations. Some groups may have learned from each other, others may have avoided one another. There may have been curiosity, fear, cooperation, or conflict. These interactions, whatever their nature, helped sculpt the genetic and cultural landscape of early Homo sapiens. The environment itself played a powerful role in this diversity. As glaciers shifted, new pathways opened across continents. When sea levels dropped, islands became connected. When climates warmed, forests transformed into savannas that invited migration. Each shift offered opportunities for contact between human species, and each separation created pockets where isolated populations could evolve independently. Ancestor X may have lived in one of these isolated pockets, perhaps a forgotten valley, a forested region with rapid decay, or a tropical zone where fossils rarely endure. And when their descendants later met Homo sapiens, they became part of the great mixing that defines modern humanity. The sheer variety of human species raises profound questions about identity. If multiple types of humans once walked the earth, what does that mean for our sense of uniqueness? Were we truly different, or just another variation that happened to endure? The age of many humans invites us to think beyond the idea of a single lineage destined to rule the planet. Instead, it reveals a world where survival was uncertain, where intelligence took different shapes, and where coexistence, not isolation, was the rule. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that prehistoric Earth was a dynamic, competitive, and creative ecosystem of human life. Every species contributed something to the evolutionary experiment: new ways of thinking, new tools, new survival strategies. Some left cultural footprints. Others left genetic legacies. And some, like Ancestor X, left only echoes, just enough for us to sense but not enough to completely understand. This era of diversity is the stage on which the mystery of Ancestor X becomes meaningful. Their existence makes sense only when viewed in the context of a world filled with different human branches, all evolving simultaneously, all shaped by local conditions, and all interacting at the margins. The age of many humans gives us the panoramic backdrop necessary to appreciate just how complex our story truly is, and how many unseen threads may still be woven into our ancestry. In this world of many humans, no species existed in isolation, and neither did we. The story of Ancestor X begins in this shared space, in this crowded evolutionary landscape. And although their bones have vanished, the echoes of their existence fit perfectly into the chorus of voices that once filled the ancient world. Their chapter is missing from the fossil record, but not from the greater narrative of humanity, a narrative we continue to unravel one discovery at a time. The first hint of Ancestor X did not arrive with the excitement of a newly unearthed skull or the shock of a never-before-seen tool. It arrived quietly, hidden inside computer screens, buried in strings of nucleotides, emerging not like a revelation but like a question. When scientists began comparing the genomes of modern humans from around the world, they expected to see the familiar signatures of Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry. These genetic traces were now well established, remnants of ancient encounters that took place as Homo sapiens migrated across continents. But within the data, something else appeared, something that didn't align with any known species. Certain genetic segments were too divergent, too old, too incompatible with any previously documented hominin. It was as though a shadow had slipped between the lines, a presence detectable only by its disruption of expected patterns. At first, researchers hesitated. Science rarely accepts anomalies without resistance. Perhaps it was a computational error, a misalignment, or contamination. But the more they refined the analysis, cleaning the data, cross-checking populations, adjusting models, the stronger the signal became. This unknown lineage stood out with increasing clarity, like a whisper growing louder in a silent room. It didn't resemble Neanderthals. It didn't resemble Denisovans. And it diverged from Homo sapiens so long ago that it must have belonged to a branch of the family tree we had never physically encountered. The realization was unsettling and electrifying at the same time. We had discovered a human species without discovering a single bone. Scientists named it not because they understood it, but because they didn't. Ghost species is a term applied to lineages that exist only as genetic traces, species whose physical remains have either not yet been found or have been completely erased by time. And among these spectral ancestors, Ancestor X emerged as one of the most intriguing. The X is not a placeholder for mystery alone, it signals an equation waiting to be solved, a variable that shapes our biology even though its identity remains hidden. This genetic ghost forces us to reimagine how discoveries happen in the modern age. The traditional image of a paleontologist kneeling in the dirt, brushing ancient sediment from a fossilized tooth, is no longer the only pathway to unlocking human history. Today, laboratories filled with humming machines and glowing monitors reveal secrets no shovel could ever reach. DNA sequencing is capable of capturing evolutionary histories preserved at the molecular level, histories that remain untouched by erosion, scavengers, or the whims of preservation. In this world, invisibility is not equal to absence. Ancestor X had lived, reproduced, and mingled with our ancestors long enough that fragments of their genetic identity lodged themselves in our genome, hidden, but not lost. The uniqueness of this discovery lies in what it suggests about human diversity in prehistory. For a ghost lineage to leave detectable traces in modern humans, it must have intersected with our ancestors in tangible, meaningful ways. These encounters, whether fleeting or continuous, were powerful enough to imprint themselves onto the future. Something about Ancestor X, whether cultural, environmental, or biological, made integration possible. They were not an insignificant or isolated group. They were part of our story, even if the fossil record refuses to acknowledge them. As scientists studied the patterns further, the genetic signature of Ancestor X began to reveal a distinct timeline. It suggested that this lineage split from other humans hundreds of thousands of years earlier than some major known branches. This profound divergence implies that Ancestor X carried traits and adaptations that may have been unlike any hominin we have ever identified. Yet because we lack bones, tools, or archaeology, their world remains shrouded in silence. Every clue we have comes from the genes of their descendants, tiny molecular fossils that survived recombination and time simply because they held some advantage or persisted through chance. When researchers presented these findings to the scientific community, the reaction was a mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and awe. The idea that an entire human species could exist without a single fossil discovery felt counterintuitive, almost impossible. But the neglected truth is that most species leave no fossil record at all. To be fossilized is to win an evolutionary lottery. To be discovered is an even rarer miracle. And so Ancestor X reminds us of a humbling reality: what we know is dwarfed by what we have yet to uncover. This ghostly genetic signal ignited new questions. Where did Ancestor X live? How widespread were they? What environments shaped their evolution? Did they resemble their Denisovan or Neanderthal cousins, or did they carry entirely different physical traits? What tools did they craft, what landscapes did they know intimately, and how did they see the world? These questions remain suspended without answers, but each one expands our imagination, urging us to reconstruct a presence from a near-total void. Even without bones, the genetic footprint of Ancestor X gives us glimpses of their impact. Some modern human populations, particularly in regions with deep ancestral diversity, carry DNA that cannot be traced to any known lineage. These fragments influence physiology, immunity, and even patterns of adaptation. In this sense, Ancestor X has never fully disappeared. Parts of them walk with us, breathe with us, live through our biology. Their extinction was not absolute, it was transformation, absorption, emerging into a larger human story. This discovery also challenged the assumption that advances in human evolution follow a clean, linear order. Instead, the presence of a genetic ghost species reveals a hidden complexity, an ancient world woven together through intertwining paths, migrations, and hybridizations. Our species is not the product of a single lineage, but the culmination of countless encounters, some known and others still veiled in shadows. Ancestor X appeared not as a fossil, but as a disturbance in the code of life, a signal rising from the deep past, insisting that history is richer and more entangled than we imagined. Their emergence marks a turning point in our understanding of human evolution, inviting us to search beyond the visible, to listen to the whispers carried in our blood, and to accept that some of our ancestors exist only as ghosts until science uncovers their physical traces. The discovery of Ancestor X did not end with the initial shock of finding unfamiliar DNA fragments in our genome. In many ways, that moment was only the beginning, an invitation to chase a presence that refused to be seen. Unlike Neanderthals or Denisovans, whose bones provided touch points in the physical world, Ancestor X existed only as an anomaly in data. And so the search for them unfolded not in caves or deserts, but inside algorithms, genetic models, and statistical simulations. It was a hunt for a shadow inside the code of life itself. Scientists approached this mystery with a mixture of caution and excitement. They knew the genetic traces were real, but interpreting them required unprecedented methods. To detect a hidden species through DNA alone, researchers had to construct elaborate population models, virtual realities that simulated hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. These models accounted for mutation rates, migration patterns, ancient population sizes, bottlenecks, and interbreeding events. And when they fed real genetic data from modern humans into these simulations, the results repeatedly pointed to the same conclusion: another hominin lineage must have contributed to our ancestry. But who were they? And why had time erased their bones? One of the core methods used in this investigation was the analysis of ghost introgression, a term that describes gene flow from an unknown population into a known one. Imagine tracing your family tree and finding that certain traits cannot be explained by any known ancestors. Something, someone, is missing from the story. That is precisely what scientists found in our DNA. Certain fragments were too ancient, branching off long before Homo sapiens encountered Neanderthals or Denisovans, yet they appeared in modern populations with clear statistical significance. These fragments were like signatures from a relative whose name had been forgotten but whose genetic influence remained unmistakable. Finding these signatures required delicate work. Researchers combed through genomic sequences, searching for patterns of variation that didn't match expected evolutionary trajectories. Some fragments appeared in Africans, others in Asians, others still in isolated populations with deep ancestral histories. Each instance required checking and rechecking, because the absence of fossil evidence makes the risk of misinterpretation higher. But each analysis pointed in the same direction: the lineage contributing these genes was not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, and not any known archaic human. The more scientists investigated, the more they realized that the story of Ancestor X was not a simple one. This lineage seems to have interacted with Homo sapiens at multiple points, possibly across different regions and time periods. To identify these events, researchers used a technique called coalescent modeling, a way of reconstructing ancestral relationships by looking backward through the branching history of genes. This method allowed them to map when and how different populations diverged, identifying moments in time where human groups must have met, mingled, and exchanged genetic material. In several models, a distinct branch kept appearing, a branch too divergent to belong to any known group. But how do you describe a species you cannot see? How do you assign a face, a form, a habitat to something known only from fragments of code? This is where the search for Ancestor X becomes both scientific and philosophical. You follow their trail through the quantitative traces they left behind, the length of certain DNA fragments, the patterns of recombination, the shared ancestral signals across diverse human groups. You begin to infer where they lived based on who carries their genetic signature today. If certain African populations carry the highest percentage, then perhaps Ancestor X existed on the continent long before Homo sapiens fully emerged. If fragments appear in Asian populations, then perhaps another branch of this lineage once crossed into the Eastern world. Each clue narrows the possibilities, but none provide a complete picture. The work of identifying a ghost species often feels like detective work, except the suspects have no faces and the clues are invisible to the naked eye. Scientists rely on probability, not certainty. They examine how deeply these unknown fragments diverge from modern humans, calculating how many hundreds of thousands of years would have been required for such genetic differences to accumulate. In the case of Ancestor X, the divergence appears to be extremely ancient, older than the split between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, older even than the Denisovan line. This suggests that Ancestor X may have been a relic from a very early branch of human evolution, surviving long enough to encounter our ancestors and pass on parts of their genome. As the models grew more sophisticated, researchers began identifying specific genetic traits likely inherited from this mysterious lineage. Some appear to relate to immune response, others to metabolic function, still others to environmental adaptation. These clues help sketch a faint silhouette of Ancestor X, not a full portrait, but a sense of their resilience, their abilities, their presence within the ecosystems they once inhabited. Each identified trait is a kind of breadcrumb, guiding us through a forest where the path has long been erased. Yet, despite advanced technology, the search remains frustratingly incomplete. There are no bones to compare these genetic predictions against. No archaeological site to contextualize their behavior. No hearth or tool that can tell us what their world looked like. And so every discovery feels balanced on the edge between knowledge and speculation. Scientists must constantly question their own assumptions, testing alternative explanations, ensuring that genetic signals are not misread. And still, the ghostly traces persist, stubborn and undeniable. What makes this search so compelling is that it challenges the traditional boundaries of anthropology. For centuries, the field relied on excavation, on physical remains, on things you can hold in your hand. But now, human history is being rewritten by equations and algorithms. The genome has become a new type of dig site, one that preserves information even when the Earth fails to. And inside this genomic landscape, Ancestor X stands like a shadow behind a curtain, present but hidden, influencing but unseen. The pursuit of this invisible ancestor pushes science into new territory, demanding collaboration across genetics, anthropology, archaeology, and computational modeling. Each discipline offers a piece of the puzzle, but none can solve it alone. The mystery of Ancestor X is not simply a scientific problem but a reminder of how limited our understanding of prehistory still is. If a species could leave such a deep impact without leaving a single bone, how many others have we overlooked? How many chapters of the human story remain unread, scattered across forgotten landscapes or dissolved by time? The search for Ancestor X is still ongoing, a quest without a clear endpoint. But even in this uncertainty, one thing has become unmistakable: humanity's past is far more complex than the fossil record suggests. The invisible ancestor, once just a whisper in genetic data, has become a powerful symbol of the hidden histories waiting to be uncovered, histories written not in stone, but in the living fabric of our bodies. To imagine the world of Ancestor X is to step into a realm where evidence is scarce, where certainty dissolves into possibility, and where every detail must be carefully woven from genetic clues, environmental context, and the behaviors of other hominins who left clearer footprints behind. Without bones or tools, we cannot draw the shape of their skull or the length of their limbs. Yet we can attempt something just as meaningful, reconstructing the life they might have lived by understanding the world that shaped them and the evolutionary forces that carved their lineage through time. The first question scientists ask when inferring the world of a ghost species is simple: where did they live? The answer, however, is anything but straightforward. Genetic signals of Ancestor X are found in populations whose roots extend deep into ancient Africa and parts of Asia. This suggests their homeland may have been vast, stretching across regions that today hold dense forests, highland plateaus, tropical savannas, or landscapes transformed by millennia of erosion. Fossils degrade rapidly in such environments, especially in humid tropical zones where bone preservation is notoriously poor. This could explain why no physical trace of Ancestor X survives. Their world may have been rich with life yet unforgiving to the fossils needed for scientific confirmation. Imagine the environment they inhabited, one full of sound and movement. If they lived in Africa, their days might have been framed by rolling savannas under wide skies, the air buzzing with insects, herds of antelope stirring the grasses, and predators stalking the edges of the horizon. If they lived in forested areas, their world would have been dim and filtered through leaves, humid and alive with birdsong and the shifting calls of primates. In Asia, their home might have been forests thick with bamboo, rugged mountain valleys, or dense subtropical jungles that swallowed footprints within hours. In any of these places, they would have needed to adapt, to navigate landscapes, find food, defend themselves, raise young, and survive alongside other hominin species. Genetic signatures offer faint but intriguing hints about how Ancestor X may have lived. Some inherited fragments found in modern populations affect metabolism, immune response, and environmental adaptation. This suggests that Ancestor X developed traits suited for surviving harsh climates or challenging ecosystems. Perhaps they had strong resistance to local pathogens, allowing them to thrive in disease-rich environments. Perhaps they possessed metabolic adaptations that helped them endure periods of scarcity or exploit food sources unique to their region. Every surviving genetic clue is a remnant of a survival strategy, a successful adaptation that proved useful enough to persist into the present. To reconstruct their physical appearance, scientists look to what is known about related hominins. Ancestor X appears to have diverged from early human lineages hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens met Neanderthals or Denisovans. This place in the timeline hints that their features might have been more archaic, perhaps closer to species like Homo heidelbergensis or early Homo erectus. Broad noses for humid environments, strong bones for endurance, faces shaped by evolutionary pressures we can only infer from climate and ecology. But without fossils, these are educated approximations, shadows of possibilities rather than definitive portraits. Still, even without knowing their exact appearance, we can imagine how they interacted with their surroundings. Like all humans, they would have relied on cooperation. No hominin lineage survives for hundreds of thousands of years without social structure. Ancestor X may have lived in small bands that traveled together, shared responsibilities, and cared for one another. They might have communicated using complex vocalizations, gestures, or early forms of symbolic behavior. Their culture, whatever its shape, would have been a product of need and creativity, just like every other human species. Their tools, although unseen, must have existed. Even the earliest hominins understood how to shape stone, break bones for marrow, sharpen sticks into spears, or use fire for warmth and protection. If Ancestor X coexisted with other human species, they would have faced competition for prey and territory. Toolmaking would have been essential. Their materials, however, may have been lost to time: wood, fibers, plant materials, or stone tools left in areas where acid soils and heavy rains erode evidence faster than archaeologists can uncover it. The emotional dimension of imagining Ancestor X's world is equally profound. These were beings who loved, grieved, nurtured, and struggled. They raised infants who depended entirely on them. They watched storms sweep across plains and fires race through forests. They encountered predators far larger and stronger than anything humans face today. And like all humans, they formed memories, of seasons, of migrations, of dangers, of safe places. Their existence was woven with meaning, even if that meaning is lost to us now. Reconstructing their world also means acknowledging who they lived alongside. Imagine their encounters with early Homo sapiens, beings who looked familiar yet foreign, perhaps more gracile, perhaps more expressive. What emotions arose when two species met? Fear? Curiosity? Mutual recognition? These meetings would have shaped not only genetic exchange but cultural direction. Perhaps Ancestor X taught early Homo sapiens how to survive in certain environments. Perhaps they learned from us. Or perhaps they kept their distance, interacting only during rare moments that left just enough genetic imprint to survive into modern populations. Ancestor X may also have encountered Denisovans or other archaic Asian hominins. In a world filled with multiple human species, boundaries were fluid. Species did not evolve in isolation, they intersected, influenced, and transformed each other. These intersections would have been moments of profound consequence, moments where the future of genetic lineages was decided not by simple evolution, but by meeting, mingling, and merging. The absence of their bones adds to the emotional weight of their story. Their world was real, filled with life, struggle, triumph, and extinction, yet time has erased the physical record. All that remains is a faint biological echo, a signature in our DNA that insists they once walked the earth. In a way, their disappearance from the fossil record mirrors the disappearance of countless human experiences throughout history, stories lost because no one wrote them down, memories erased because no one survived to tell them. And yet, the reconstruction of their world through science and imagination keeps them alive in a new sense. The world of Ancestor X becomes a mosaic built from the worlds of their relatives, the landscapes of ancient Earth, and the clues left in our genomes. It is not a perfect picture, but a meaningful one. It allows us to feel the presence of a lineage that time tried to silence but could not completely erase. The process of imagining their world also deepens our relationship with the broader human story. It reminds us that we are the product of countless forgotten lives. It reminds us that the Earth once held many versions of humanity, each adapting, evolving, and surviving in their own way. And it reminds us that absence is not the end of existence. Ancestor X may be invisible, but their world is not beyond reach. With each new discovery, each genetic insight, each reconstructed environment, we bring them one step closer to recognition, and honor the life they once lived in a world that has now vanished. To understand how Ancestor X became part of our genetic story, we must follow the footsteps of early Homo sapiens as they began one of the most important journeys in human history, the Great Migrations out of Africa. These movements were not swift, singular events. They were long, winding processes that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. Small bands of humans pushed into unfamiliar lands, driven by climate shifts, dwindling resources, curiosity, or simple chance. With every step they took, they entered landscapes already shaped by other human species, Neanderthals in Europe and parts of Western Asia, Denisovans deep in the east, and perhaps Ancestor X roaming territory somewhere along the routes early humans crossed. These migrations created intersections, crossroads where lives, cultures, and genetic lineages collided. Imagine the world 60,000 to 100,000 years ago. Africa, the birthplace of all known human species, was experiencing dramatic climate fluctuations. Periods of drought pushed animal migrations northward, forcing human groups to follow. The Red Sea occasionally narrowed during ice ages, making crossing points more accessible. Coastlines stretched farther as sea levels dropped, exposing new paths along the Arabian Peninsula. Every environmental change opened temporary windows of opportunity, and early humans seized them instinctively. They were explorers by necessity, adapting to new terrains with a blend of caution and resilience. As these groups moved into Eurasia, they would have encountered Neanderthals almost immediately. This meeting is well documented through fossils and genetics. But what remains less understood is the series of deeper, subtler encounters that may have happened beyond the well-mapped regions, encounters with hominin groups that left no bones behind but left a measurable imprint in the DNA of their descendants. Ancestor X was likely one of these groups, living in regions where early Homo sapiens expanded into, possibly across Africa or Asia, or even in migration corridors between them. Migration, for early humans, was not a straight march across continents. It involved cycles of movement, retreat, settlement, and displacement. Groups split apart, reunited, merged, or vanished. Some found fertile valleys and stayed for generations, others moved constantly, following grazing herds or fleeing environmental changes. These patterns of movement increased the likelihood of overlapping territories with other human species. Each overlap created the potential for interaction, peaceful or violent, brief or sustained. To picture these encounters, imagine a band of Homo sapiens arriving at a river valley they had never seen before. They notice footprints in the mud that resemble their own but are subtly different, broader, deeper, perhaps belonging to a people unfamiliar to them. They might find abandoned tools manufactured in a style they do not recognize. The smell of smoke from a distant fire might hint at others nearby. At night, they may hear calls or chatter unlike anything their group has ever produced. In such moments, early humans would have realized they were not alone. Ancestor X may have lived in similar territories, fertile areas that attracted multiple human species. River basins, coastal regions, highlands with abundant resources, or forest edges where prey gathered would have served as convergence zones. These landscapes, rich with life, were natural crossroads where humans met, observed, learned from one another, competed, or simply coexisted. The interactions that followed, whether cautious meetings, exchanges of tools or knowledge, shared hunts, or intermarriage, left subtle marks that researchers would one day find written in chromosomes. Genetic evidence suggests that the encounters with Ancestor X were not extremely rare. Their DNA is not a small molecular accident, it indicates meaningful, repeated contact. This implies that early Homo sapiens did not merely pass through their territories, they stayed long enough to form relationships, build trust, or participate in complex social dynamics. These interactions would have influenced both groups. Homo sapiens might have adopted survival strategies from Ancestor X that were suited for local climates. Ancestor X, likewise, would have encountered new ideas, behaviors, or technologies carried by migrants who traveled across continents. Yet the crossroad was not always harmonious. Competition for resources was inevitable. Different human species may have viewed each other as threats, rivals, or obstacles. Clashes could erupt over hunting grounds, water sources, or shelter. In some cases, these conflicts may have contributed to the eventual decline of smaller populations. But even in conflict, humans sometimes interbred, a reminder that biology often transcends social tension. Where humans meet, complexity follows. Climate played a major role in shaping these encounters. Shifting rainfall patterns, expanding deserts, glacial advances, and abrupt cooling events sometimes forced humans into compressed habitats. When resources shrank, groups that had once been separated by distance found themselves sharing the same shrinking spaces. In these pressure zones, interactions with Ancestor X may have been intensified, whether through cooperation born of necessity or desperation born of scarcity. The Great Migrations did more than spread our species across the world, they braided together the histories of multiple human lineages. Every time a new group entered a region, it encountered the descendants of earlier waves or the survivors of older evolutionary experiments. Ancestor X represents one of these branches, an ancient lineage that stood at the crossroads of humanity's expansion, influencing the course of our evolution even as its own path disappeared. Understanding this era helps explain how deeply interconnected ancient human populations were. Migration was never a one-way journey, it was a continuous flow of movement, adaptation, and encounter. And within this fluid world, Ancestor X existed as both a participant and a mystery, shaping others while remaining unseen in the archaeological record. Their presence at the crossroads of migration emphasizes how fragile and fragmentary our understanding of prehistory truly is. Human history is not a straight road but a web of intersecting paths. Some leads we uncover through fossils, others through tools, and some, like Ancestor X, only through the genetic signatures left in the living descendants of those ancient travelers. The story of these crossroads reveals a deeper truth: humanity did not emerge alone or follow a solitary line across the continents. It moved through a world already filled with intelligence, adaptation, and diversity. Ancestor X was part of that world, a fellow traveler in the vast, ancient landscape where human species met, mingled, and helped shape the future. When early Homo sapiens encountered Ancestor X, the meeting would not have been a simple or predictable event. These were beings separated by hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary divergence, different faces, different instincts, different ways of understanding the world. And yet, they were also alike enough to recognize each other as something familiar: upright walkers, tool users, fire keepers, problem solvers. This tension between similarity and difference created a spectrum of possible interactions, ranging from curiosity to conflict, from cooperation to something even more intimate. The genetic traces of Ancestor X within our DNA suggest that these encounters were far more than momentary sightings. They involved real relationships, real exchanges, and real emotional stakes. To imagine these meetings, picture a clearing in an ancient forest where two species of humans stumble upon each other for the first time. The air is thick with uncertainty. The Homo sapiens group may be smaller and more lightly built. Ancestor X might have carried an appearance shaped by deeper evolutionary roots, perhaps more robust or bearing features unfamiliar to modern eyes. Each group studies the other with a mix of fear and fascination. Neither fully understands the motivations or capabilities of the other. But in that moment, one universal truth cuts through the silence: survival depends on choosing wisely, fight, flee, or communicate. Conflict would have been one possible outcome. Resources like water, prey, and shelter were precious. A sudden encounter could trigger defensive aggression, especially if one group felt outnumbered or vulnerable. A thrown stone, a raised spear, a shouted warning, these gestures could escalate or resolve tension. In a world without treaties or shared language, the boundary between peace and violence was razor-thin. Yet conflict, while likely at times, cannot explain the genetic blending that persists today. Something more complex must have unfolded. Curiosity is another possibility. Early humans were deeply observant creatures. Their survival depended on noticing patterns, behaviors, and opportunities. Seeing another species that moved like them but differed in posture or expression could spark interest rather than hostility. They may have watched each other from a distance, tracking behaviors to judge whether the newcomers were dangerous. Over time, familiarity could soften fear. Perhaps one group learned that the others hunted different prey or gathered different plants, reducing competition. Perhaps they saw each other tending children or preparing food, recognizable acts of care that revealed shared humanity. Cooperation also lies within the realm of possibility. Different human species often occupied overlapping ecological niches but were not identical in skill or adaptation. Ancestor X may have known how to thrive in regions that were new or difficult for Homo sapiens. They may have understood local predators, seasonal patterns, or hidden sources of food and water. Cooperation might have emerged naturally when knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Temporary alliances during hunts, shared shelters during storms, or unspoken truces at common water sources could have grown into something more sustained. Cooperation in harsh environments is not just strategic, it is instinctive. And then there is intimacy, the most controversial and emotionally charged possibility. Interbreeding between species is not a matter of simple choice, it reflects proximity, opportunity, and the gradual development of trust or necessity. Relationships may have formed through peaceful integration of groups, agreements between small bands, or the merging of communities after environmental crises. These unions may have been consensual, strategic, or shaped by cultural norms we cannot reconstruct. But the genetic evidence is clear. Some individuals from Homo sapiens and Ancestor X formed bonds that resulted in children. These children grew, survived, and passed on their inherited traits that live within some modern human populations today. Such intimacy raises profound questions. What did these mixed families look like? How were they treated by their communities? Were they symbols of unity or reminders of difference? Without tools or burial sites, we cannot know their exact social dynamics. But human emotion has ancient roots. Attraction, partnership, curiosity, fear, protectiveness, these feelings did not emerge suddenly in modern times. They were already deeply woven into our species long before our ancestors met Ancestor X. It is entirely possible that these encounters led not only to the blending of genes but also to the blending of stories, rituals, and innovations. Survival, of course, remained the backdrop to all interactions. Any moment of contact between species would have been filtered through the lens of harsh reality. Food was scarce. Predators were near. Climate shifts could devastate populations. Cooperation might have helped both groups survive in certain conditions, just as conflict might have eliminated one group in others. The presence of multiple human species did not guarantee endless cultural exchange. It meant balancing risk and opportunity, constantly negotiating the meaning of coexistence. For Ancestor X, meeting Homo sapiens may have brought both promise and danger. The newcomers were adaptable, resourceful, and capable of forming complex social networks. Their arrival may have destabilized existing territories or introduced new competition. But it may also have introduced new ideas, better tools, new hunting strategies, or broader social alliances. Meetings between species were moments when entire evolutionary trajectories could shift. One can also imagine smaller, quieter scenes, a lone wanderer from Ancestor X encountering a Homo sapiens group and choosing to approach rather than flee, children from both species watching each other play from opposite sides of a stream, shared fires on cold nights, silent moments of mutual respect as two species recognize in each other the spark of intelligence. These scenes are speculative, yet they are rooted in the shared emotional and cognitive capacities of ancient humans. The genetic evidence confirms that some interactions led to long-term consequences, descendants who would carry the legacy of Ancestor X for thousands of generations. These encounters were not isolated accidents but meaningful exchanges woven into the broader tapestry of human evolution. They remind us that humanity's story has never been the tale of a single lineage conquering the world alone. It has always been a story of connection, sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent, but always transformative. The meetings between Homo sapiens and Ancestor X were crossroads where biology and culture intertwined. Whether shaped by love, conflict, or survival, these encounters left permanent marks on our genome. They remind us that belonging is not defined by purity or isolation but by shared history, shared struggle, and shared existence. And they challenge us to rethink what it means to be human, not as a solitary species, but as the final chapter of an ancient and intertwined family. When scientists first examined the full genomes of modern humans from around the world, they expected to find familiar signatures, patterns left behind by known hominin relatives like Neanderthals and Denisovans. What they did not expect were long, ancient fragments of DNA that did not match any known species. These segments were older, more divergent, carrying evolutionary histories that stretched back far beyond the timelines explained by our current understanding. They were echoes, ghostly reminders of encounters that left no physical trace, yet endured within the intimate architecture of human genetics. Through these echoes, Ancestor X reveals itself not as a myth, but as an unseen contributor to our biological identity. To understand how these genetic echoes work, imagine the human genome as a vast library. Every gene is a book, every mutation a sentence, every inherited fragment a surviving page from countless ancestors. Over generations, these pages are shuffled, torn, mixed, and rewritten by recombination. Most ancient signatures fade into obscurity as genetic reshuffling dilutes them. But some fragments persist, especially if they offered an advantage, or simply survived through chance. The fragments linked to Ancestor X are precisely these survivors, pieces of an unknown lineage preserved inside us, waiting for scientists to recognize their unfamiliar patterns. These patterns emerged through comparative genomic studies, which involved aligning DNA sequences across multiple populations and identifying portions that diverged too deeply to have originated from Homo sapiens alone. Some regions appeared remarkably ancient, reflecting a lineage that branched off long before modern humans, Neanderthals, or Denisovans took shape. This divergence is what gives the genetic signature of Ancestor X its haunting presence. It is not just different, it is ancient in a way that defies all known fossil records. In many cases, these ancestral fragments affect functional regions of the genome. Some influence the immune system, helping populations respond to local pathogens. Others affect metabolism, altering how the body processes fats, sugars, or certain plant compounds. Still others appear in regulatory regions, areas that control when and how genes activate. These regulatory influences may have subtle but significant effects on development, physiology, or adaptation to environmental pressures. Through these echoes, Ancestor X becomes more than a long-lost lineage, it becomes a contributor to human resilience. One of the most fascinating aspects of these genetic signals is their uneven distribution across different populations. Some African groups carry fragments that do not appear in non-African genomes. Certain Asian populations carry segments of unknown origin that do not match Denisovan or Neanderthal patterns. This mosaic-like distribution of ghost DNA suggests multiple interactions across time and space, interactions that occurred long before modern humans fully spread across continents. It paints a picture of ancient landscapes where multiple hominin groups overlapped, separated, encountered each other again, and exchanged genetic material in ways that shaped the future of all involved. To detect these echoes, scientists rely on advanced statistical techniques. One approach involves identifying deeply divergent haplotypes, clusters of genes whose evolutionary history does not align with the rest of the genome. When such clusters appear consistently among unrelated individuals within a population, it signals the past presence of another hominin lineage. Another method looks for regions where modern humans carry unusually high levels of genetic diversity. Such diversity often indicates admixture with an unknown species, because blending two distinct lineages increases variation beyond what internal evolution alone can explain. The analysis becomes even more compelling when these ancient fragments cluster in specific functional categories. For example, if a gene associated with immune defense shows unusual divergence, it may indicate that ancient humans inherited beneficial immunity from Ancestor X, immunity shaped by pathogens that modern humans had never encountered. This is how DNA preserves the silent memories of battles long forgotten. Even without knowing the exact face or form of Ancestor X, we can see the marks left by their evolutionary struggles. Still, the echoes are incomplete. The genome does not tell us everything. It cannot recreate the full anatomy, the culture, the tools, or the worldview of a ghost species. It offers only fragments, a scattering of clues left by interbreeding events that were themselves influenced by geography, climate, chance, and human behavior. Each fragment is like a whisper from the past, too faint to form a full sentence but too distinct to ignore. These genetic echoes also challenge the boundaries of species themselves. Traditionally, species are defined by reproductive isolation, groups that cannot interbreed. But ancient humans defy this rule again and again. Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least one lineage we have never physically identified. This blurring of species boundaries forces us to rethink what it means to be human. Our genome is not the product of a single lineage but a tapestry woven from multiple threads, some bright and obvious, others nearly invisible. Ancestor X contributes to this tapestry, blending biological histories into something far more intricate than the linear model once taught in textbooks. As we explore these echoes, a deeper philosophical question arises: how many ancestors do we carry whose names we will never know? The genome holds countless stories that remain unread, countless branches that never fossilized, countless interactions erased except for a few surviving genes. Ancestor X may be the most prominent of these unknowns, but it is almost certainly not the only one. The echo of their existence suggests that our evolutionary landscape is filled with missing chapters, whole populations that shaped us yet vanished without leaving physical evidence. These genetic imprints also hold emotional weight. They remind us that extinction is not always absolute. A species may disappear from the earth, but parts of it can live on through the descendants who inherit its traits. In this sense, Ancestor X did not vanish completely. They became part of us. Their adaptations, their struggles, and their successes are encrypted within our cells. Whether through a fragment controlling immune response or a cluster affecting environmental tolerance, their life's imprint flows through our veins, connecting us to a lineage we will never fully see. The echoes in the genome are invitations to look deeper. They tell us that the human story is not complete, that the fossil record shows only a fraction of the truth. They tell us that there are ancestors we carry whose worlds are lost but not forgotten, whose existence shaped our survival, whose contributions ripple through time in ways we are only beginning to understand. Ancestor X remains a ghost, unseen, unburied, unremembered in any archaeological sense. But their echoes endure within us, whispering reminders that the human journey was shared with others, shaped by relationships with species whose identities are still blurred by time. Through their genetic traces, Ancestor X continues to speak, not in words or artifacts, but in the biological language that binds us to the ancient world. Long before scientists recognized the existence of Ancestor X, there was another mystery, one that arrived in the form of a single fragment of bone from the remote Denisova cave in Siberia. It was a discovery so unassuming that it almost went unnoticed, a small finger bone from a young girl, unearthed in the cold, dim layers of a cave where humans had once taken shelter from the freezing winds of the Altai Mountains. When researchers extracted DNA from that bone, they expected to confirm it as Neanderthal. Instead, what emerged was something entirely different, so genetically distinct that it forced science to acknowledge a new human species, the Denisovans. This moment changed everything, not only because it revealed a lineage we had never seen before, but because it proved that entire human species could exist without leaving behind more than a few fragments. The Denisovan discovery reshaped the landscape of human evolution. Suddenly, the fossil record was no longer the ultimate authority. A single bone had overturned decades of assumptions, revealing a branch of humanity that had been hiding in plain sight within our own genomes. The revelation sent a ripple through anthropology, raising unsettling questions. If a whole species could be discovered by accident from one tiny bone, then how many more might have existed undetected? How many more, like Ancestor X, had left no fossils, or left fossils we simply haven't recognized yet? The Denisovans offered the first modern example of a genetic species, a lineage known primarily through DNA rather than skeletal features. Their physical appearance remains almost entirely unknown. Their bones, few as they are, provide only fragments, a tooth, a finger bone, part of a jaw. Yet their genetic legacy is scattered across modern human populations, especially in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, Australia, and parts of East and Southeast Asia. This genetic imprint revealed how widespread and influential they once were. They lived across a massive geographic range, far larger than anyone had imagined for an ancient hominin species. And they interbred with Homo sapiens multiple times, leaving behind genetic contributions that still influence modern adaptations, such as high-altitude tolerance in Tibetan populations. It is through the Denisovans that we learn to trust the genome even when the Earth remains silent. Their discovery validated the concept of ghost species, lineages known through genetic footprints alone. Before Denisova Cave, such an idea might have seemed too speculative. But now, armed with the certainty that an entire species could be uncovered without traditional fossils, scientists became more confident in the genetic signals pointing toward Ancestor X. If Denisovans could exist unseen for so long, why couldn't others? The Denisovan puzzle also highlighted how complex and intertwined human evolution truly is. Their DNA reveals multiple branches within their own lineage, meaning that even within the Denisovans, there were subgroups that diverged significantly from one another. This complexity mirrors the tangled ancestry suggested by the presence of Ancestor X, a reminder that human evolution was not a simple tree but a vast, braided river with countless tributaries merging and separating across time. The existence of Denisovans also provided a benchmark for recognizing ancient introgression, the mixing of distinct human species. Their genetic signals helped researchers refine the computational tools needed to detect ghost lineages. When scientists compared Denisovan DNA with unknown genetic fragments found in modern humans, they realized that some sequences did not match Denisovans, Neanderthals, or Homo sapiens. This discrepancy strengthened the case for Ancestor X. Without the Denisovan reference, those fragments might have been misidentified or overlooked entirely. Denisova Cave itself became a symbol of hidden histories. Deep within its layers, researchers found evidence of multiple hominin occupations spanning tens of thousands of years. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly even early Homo sapiens all passed through the same cave at different times, leaving behind traces of their presence. These findings showed that human species overlapped in ways that had never been fully appreciated before. It created a vivid mental image, a landscape where different humans walked the same paths, touched the same stones, and used the same shelters, sometimes separated by millennia, sometimes coexisting. The cave also produced one of the most remarkable discoveries in anthropology, the remains of a girl who was the child of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This direct evidence of interbreeding shattered any remaining illusion that human species were isolated from one another. It also underscored the idea that interactions between hominin species were common enough to produce children who survived long enough to leave bones that could be found tens of thousands of years later. If Neanderthals and Denisovans could produce offspring, then it becomes even more plausible that Homo sapiens interbred with multiple unknown lineages, including Ancestor X. For researchers studying ghost species, the Denisovan example is a guiding light. It demonstrates that paleogenetics can reveal species that the fossil record hides. It shows that genetic signatures can reconstruct lost worlds, resurrecting species that have vanished from physical memory. And it proves that the human story is filled with gaps too large to ignore. The Denisovan puzzle piece fits perfectly into the broader search for Ancestor X. Both lineages challenge our expectations about what should remain visible after hundreds of thousands of years. Both reveal that human evolution is full of vanished lineages whose influence persists in our DNA. Both remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Most importantly, the Denisovan discovery unlocks a sense of imaginative freedom grounded in scientific truth. If one species could exist almost entirely in genetic form, then Ancestor X, whose presence is written into living human genomes but not yet matched to fossils, becomes a compelling possibility rather than a far-fetched theory. Denisovans transformed the scientific world's ability to see, proving that genetic ghosts are real, significant, and essential to understanding our origins. Ancestor X, then, becomes part of a larger pattern, a pattern in which lost ancestors stand just beyond the edge of visibility, their stories preserved not in bone or stone, but in the quiet molecular echoes of ancient encounters. Through the Denisovan puzzle, we learn how to interpret these echoes, how to follow them into the past, and how to recognize the unseen forces that help shape who we are today. Africa, the cradle of humanity, holds some of the greatest secrets of our evolutionary past. It is the continent where Homo sapiens first emerged, where older hominins evolved and diversified, and where countless human stories were born long before our species ever stepped beyond its borders. Yet ironically, it is also the place where the fossil record is most frustrating, rich in some regions, empty in others, full of extraordinary discoveries but also massive gaps that swallow entire chapters of our ancestry. In this vast, complex landscape of deep time and incomplete evidence, the genetic signatures of Ancestor X become even more intriguing. And Africa, more than any other continent, holds the strongest hints of multiple ghost lineages. When geneticists studied the DNA of various African populations, they found something remarkable: fragments of archaic DNA that could not be matched to any known species, not to Neanderthals, not to Denisovans, and not even to early modern humans. These fragments were deeply divergent, branching off from the human family tree hundreds of thousands of years ago. Their divergence was too great to be explained by variation within Homo sapiens, and too distinct to belong to Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestry. The only explanation was both simple and profound: ancient humans in Africa interbred with one or more unknown hominin species, ghost lineages whose physical remains have not yet been uncovered or identified. These discoveries transformed our understanding of African prehistory. For many years, the scientific narrative imagined Africa as the homeland of Homo sapiens alone, with other hominin species largely disappearing elsewhere. But genetic evidence challenges this image. It suggests that Africa was not just the birthplace of humanity but also a crowded evolutionary arena where multiple human species coexisted, overlapped, and interacted. Ancestor X may be only one of several unknown African lineages that shaped the genes of modern populations. To understand why these ghost lineages remain invisible in the fossil record, we must consider the geological and environmental reality of Africa. Many regions of the continent are hot, humid, and biologically active, conditions that are disastrous for fossil preservation. Bones decay rapidly in such climates. Soil chemistry dissolves skeletal material before it can fossilize. Heavy rain, erosion, and plant growth disturb sediment layers. Entire evolutionary histories can vanish in the churn of tropical ecosystems. This means that some hominin species may have thrived for hundreds of thousands of years in Africa without leaving behind a single fossil that could survive into the present. Yet despite this invisibility, their genetic footprints endure. When early Homo sapiens expanded across Africa, they encountered and interbred with these archaic populations. This interbreeding was not rare or incidental. Some genetic signatures indicate multiple events spread across different regions and time periods. The echoes of these encounters appear in immune-related genes, metabolic pathways, and regulatory sequences that influence how modern African populations adapt to local environments. These inherited fragments are not curiosities, they are functional remnants of survival strategies perfected by hominins who lived and died in African landscapes long before our species fully emerged. Researchers have identified some of the most divergent ghost DNA in groups whose ancestors lived in Central and Western Africa. These populations carry genetic traces that diverged from Homo sapiens more than 500,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. This suggests that the unknown lineage, or lineages, contributing to this DNA may have branched off around the time of Homo heidelbergensis or another early ancestor whose fossil evidence in Africa remains sparse or controversial. These ancient groups may have persisted for far longer than expected, living alongside emerging Homo sapiens for tens of thousands of years. The idea of multiple African ghost lineages complicates the traditional view of human evolution. For decades, the out of Africa model was misunderstood as implying that Homo sapiens arose in Africa from a single, uniform ancestral population. But the genetic evidence points to a different reality. Early Africa was home to a network of semi-isolated human populations, some modern, some archaic, some ghostly, interacting across a sprawling and diverse continent. These populations diverged, mixed, separated, and reconnected, creating a braided evolutionary history rather than a clean, linear progression. Ancestor X may have been one of these African lineages. Or it may represent a lineage that existed both in Africa and parts of Eurasia. Or perhaps there were multiple ghost species, each contributing small genetic threads to the tapestry of modern human diversity. What we call Ancestor X could turn out to be several distinct groups whose signatures overlap in the genetic record. This uncertainty reflects the sheer complexity of human origins in Africa, a place where deep time carved out evolutionary paths that science has only begun to illuminate. The presence of ghost lineages also forces us to rethink how we conceptualize species. If Homo sapiens interbred with multiple archaic groups within Africa, then our emergence was not a sudden, clean event. It was a gradual process shaped by countless interactions with related species. The boundaries between modern humans and archaic humans may be more fluid than once thought. In Africa, especially, these boundaries blur beyond recognition. The continent's size and ecological diversity allowed ancient populations to evolve separately in some regions while maintaining contact across others. The result is a mosaic of ancestry that defies simple categorization. Despite the lack of fossils, we can still imagine the world these African ghost lineages inhabited. They lived among lush forest corridors, rugged highlands, swampy river basins, and savannas alive with shifting herds and predators. They adapted to diseases unknown outside Africa, to climates that oscillated between drought and abundance, to landscapes shaped by volcanic eruptions and dramatic weather cycles. Their survival demanded creativity, intelligence, and social cohesion. These were not primitive beings, they were successful hominins who endured for hundreds of thousands of years in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Their interactions with early Homo sapiens were likely shaped by necessity and opportunity. Some groups may have shared knowledge of plants, water sources, or migration routes. Others may have competed for territory or mates. Some encounters may have led to temporary alliances or shared shelters during droughts or storms. Interbreeding would have occurred wherever boundaries softened, where small populations met, where isolation broke down, where individuals from different lineages saw each other not as threats but as potential partners. In this tangled evolutionary landscape, Ancestor X becomes more than a genetic curiosity. It becomes a symbol of Africa's hidden histories, a reminder that the earliest chapters of the human story were far more complex than we once believed. The African ghost lineages reveal a world where diversity was the norm, not the exception. A world where human evolution unfolded as a symphony of interactions rather than a solo performance. A world where ancient species vanished without leaving remains, but whose contributions live on inside us. As we continue to analyze African genomes, we may uncover even more evidence of these ghost lineages. New technologies, improved sequencing, proteomics, ancient sediment DNA analysis, offer hope that we may one day detect the physical traces of Ancestor X or its relatives. But even without bones, their legacy is undeniable. They shaped who we are. They shaped how we adapt. They shaped the evolutionary path that led to the rise of modern humanity. Asia, the largest continent on Earth, holds some of the deepest mysteries of human evolution. Its vast landscapes, towering mountain ranges, immense deserts, dense jungles, island chains, and subterranean caverns, have preserved the traces of hominin species that defy easy classification. Fossils unearthed here often blur the boundaries between known lineages or introduce entirely new puzzles. This sprawling region becomes particularly important when exploring the story of Ancestor X, because many of the genetic signals that cannot be explained by Neanderthals or Denisovans appear in populations rooted in Asia. Some of these clues align with known fossils, others do not. All of them point toward a complex, entangled evolutionary history across the Eastern world. Asia's fossil record reads like a fragmented myth, scattered in pieces across thousands of miles. In southern China, researchers discovered the red deer cave people, late surviving humans with an unusual mix of archaic and modern features. Their skulls were robust and thick-boned, their faces retained traits more commonly found in much older hominins. Yet they lived only around 14,000 years ago. Their presence suggests that deeply divergent human lineages endured long after Homo sapiens arrived, hidden in remote corners of Asia. Something about their anatomy and chronology hints at evolutionary branches not captured in the traditional fossil tree. They did not fit the Denisovan or Neanderthal profile, and they certainly were not fully modern. They represent one of many shadows cast by unknown ancestors. Then, there is Homo luzonensis from the Philippines, another astonishing discovery that shook the foundations of human anthropology. Found in Callao Cave, their remains showed tiny statures and unexpectedly primitive features reminiscent of species that lived millions of years earlier. Yet they occupied the island around 50,000 years ago, at the same time that Homo sapiens roamed nearby regions. Their arrival raises countless questions. How did such an ancient-looking hominin survive into the late Ice Age? Did they evolve in isolation? Were they descendants of a much older migration wave out of Africa? And could they, or their relatives, play a role in the mysterious traces of ghost DNA in modern populations? These Asian enigmas complicate the search for Ancestor X in profound ways. They highlight the possibility that multiple hominin species coexisted across Eastern and Southern Asia, species that left fossils, species that left DNA, and species that may have left neither. Some groups may have interbred with Homo sapiens and contributed to our genetic diversity. Others may never have encountered our ancestors at all. The diversity of Asian hominins reveals a continent teeming with evolutionary experiments, shaped by isolation, climate variation, and terrain that could hide populations for thousands of years. The Denisovans themselves add another layer to this puzzle. Though known primarily through genetics and a handful of bones, their range appears to have been enormous. Traces of Denisovan ancestry are found from Siberia to Tibet to Southeast Asia and the islands beyond. But the Denisovans were not a single, uniform group. Their genome shows deep internal diversity, so deep, in fact, that some Denisovan subgroups were almost as genetically distant from each other as Neanderthals were from them. This internal complexity reveals how Asia served as a crossroads for ancient populations, where isolation and mixing occurred repeatedly. Some of these subgroups could easily be mistaken for separate species if we found their fossils. Others may have overlapped genetically with the ghost lineage we now call Ancestor X. Yet, not all unexplained DNA in Asia can be attributed to Denisovans. Certain fragments diverge too early, too sharply, from the Denisovan family tree. These genetic signatures suggest contributions from a lineage even older, or one that branched off the human family tree in a direction we have not yet mapped. These fragments form part of the evidence for Ancestor X. They imply that Asia, like Africa, may have housed multiple unknown hominin groups that survived long enough to meet and interbreed with modern humans. Southeast Asia, in particular, may have been a hotspot for this kind of hidden diversity. Islands separated by deep water channels created isolated evolutionary environments. Populations could remain cut off for tens of thousands of years, evolving independently into new forms. Climate fluctuations shifted habitable regions repeatedly, forcing migrations and creating new opportunities for contact between species. In these shifting geographies, ghost lineages may have persisted undetected, blending with Homo sapiens in certain pockets while disappearing entirely from others. It is also possible that Ancestor X or its relatives lived in regions where fossil preservation is extremely poor, humid jungles that rapidly destroy bone, volcanic landscapes that bury evidence, or river valleys where floods scatter remains beyond recovery. The absence of fossils does not mean the absence of species. Asia's size and environmental diversity make it one of the easiest places for an entire lineage to remain hidden from the fossil record while still leaving a genetic mark on modern humans. Another intriguing question is whether Ancestor X might be connected to archaic populations hinted at in Chinese fossil records, skulls and jaws that show unusual combinations of traits but cannot be definitively placed in any known species. Some fossils suggest hybridization events, others imply deeply divergent roots. These ambiguous finds lend weight to the idea that there were more hominin lineages in Asia than the scientific community has formally recognized. The Asian enigma is not just about fossils or genetic fragments, it is about the story they collectively tell. It is about a continent where human diversity was richer and more tangled than we ever imagined. It is about hidden migrations, isolated refuges, and unexpected encounters. It is about populations that thrived in silence, leaving behind no tools or hearts we can confidently identify. And it is about the profound humility required to acknowledge that we still understand only a fraction of our origins. Ancestor X fits naturally into this environment of mystery. Whether they lived in Africa, Asia, or both, the Asian genetic signatures make it clear that at least one unknown hominin lineage intersected with Homo sapiens in this vast region. Their DNA suggests deep antiquity, unique adaptations, and a lineage that deserves recognition even if its bones remain lost. In the end, the Asian enigma expands our imagination. It reminds us that human evolution was not confined to a few well-known species. It was a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful process, full of surprises, full of hidden chapters, and full of ancestors we are only now beginning to rediscover. Ancestor X is one of those rediscoveries, a ghost whose presence lingers in our genes and whose identity may one day be illuminated by a single fossil fragment waiting quietly beneath the ancient soils of Asia. To imagine the encounters between Homo sapiens and Ancestor X is to step into a world where the past becomes vivid again, where ancient landscapes breathe with life, and where silence carries the weight of two different kinds of humans seeing each other for the first time. These moments of contact, though lost to time, echo through the genetic traces they left behind. And although no written accounts or fossil records describe them, we can reconstruct their emotional atmosphere through what we know about early human behavior, ecology, and the subtle imprint of ancient DNA. Picture a river valley at dusk, tens of thousands of years ago. The sky is fading into deep purples and reds, and the air is rich with the scent of damp earth and wild vegetation. A small group of Homo sapiens approaches the water's edge, weary from a day of travel. They expect solitude, perhaps other animals, perhaps danger, but not other humans. Then, across the river, they see movement, figures standing still, watching them from the shadows of the trees. These beings look human yet unfamiliar, their posture slightly different, their silhouettes broader or more angular. This moment, charged with fear, awe, and uncertainty, may have been one of countless first encounters between our species and Ancestor X. The first reaction would have been caution. Early humans were highly attuned to threat. They would have gripped their tools, lowered their voices, scanned their surroundings for escape routes or signs of aggression. But what if the figures across the river also hesitated, also watched quietly, also measured danger with the same ancient instincts? In that shared pause, there is a powerful human truth: recognition. Both groups, though separated by deep evolutionary lines, could see reflections of themselves in the others, the upright posture, the hands, the eyes. Perhaps neither group advanced immediately. Perhaps they circled each other over days or weeks, leaving signs but avoiding direct conflict. Humans leave traces whether they intend to or not: footprints, discarded bones, campfire ashes. Each group might have learned the other's patterns before risking a closer encounter. And eventually, curiosity, one of the most ancient human traits, would triumph over fear. Imagine a second meeting, this time closer. A single individual stepping forward, offering a gesture of peace. A lowered weapon. An extended hand. A shared resource, a piece of meat, a fruit, a tool made of bone or stone. Early humans understood the value of alliances, however temporary. The world they lived in was too dangerous, too unpredictable, for constant hostility. Cooperation, even brief, could save lives. Such moments would have been filled with indescribable tension. What words or sounds were exchanged? Did they attempt to mimic each other's gestures? Did they laugh nervously, or stay silent, communicating through body language alone? Though we cannot know, we can imagine the blend of confusion and fascination, as two species met with enough similarity to understand each other's intent, yet enough difference to create an air of strangeness. But not all contact would have been peaceful. Competition for land, food, or water could turn meetings into conflicts. Two groups arriving at the same resource-rich valley might clash by necessity. Early humans were capable of cooperation, but they were also capable of territorial aggression. Spears and stones may have flown across clearings. Camps may have been abandoned under threat. The fear of the unknown, of another species that moved with human intelligence, could ignite violence or distrust. These darker moments, too, are part of our shared history. Yet even in conflict, boundaries blur. Wariness can soften. The presence of strangers can gradually become normal. Over time, individuals from both groups might have traveled alone, got separated, or ventured into the territories of the other. In these liminal spaces, away from the strict social pressures of their groups, friendships or bonds may have formed. Curiosity often unfolds most powerfully on the edges of society, where rules loosen and encounters become more personal. It is in these quiet, personal interactions that interbreeding likely occurred. Imagine a young woman from a band of Homo sapiens encountering a solitary member of Ancestor X near a forest clearing. They watch each other over multiple meetings, learning each other's rhythms. Their gestures soften. Their fear dissolves. What begins in uncertainty becomes a connection shaped by human instinct, companionship, desire, survival. From such a union, a child could be born carrying the heritage of two different species. That child would grow, become part of a band, and pass on the genetic fragments that scientists detect today. In this way, intimacy between species becomes more than romance or instinct. It becomes a bridge, linking two evolutionary paths that had diverged long before these individuals were born. Each child carrying such mixed ancestry blended the genetic worlds of their parents, ensuring that even as one lineage vanished, it would continue to echo within the survivors. Moments of contact also extended beyond pairings. Groups could share knowledge, tracking skills, edible plant identification, hunting strategies, tool-making techniques. Perhaps Ancestor X had mastered a survival tactic unique to their environment, and early Homo sapiens borrowed or adapted it. Cultural exchange may have flowed both ways, enriching the capabilities of both populations. But time and circumstance eventually pulled these groups apart. Some encounters were fleeting, some long-term. Some shaped generations, others left only faint footprints in the genetic landscape. Ancestor X, whatever their appearance or culture, ultimately disappeared as a distinct lineage. But the moments of contact they shared with Homo sapiens were significant enough to ensure that they lived on in us, in our DNA, in the adaptations we inherited, and in the silent imprint of their ancient presence. These imagined scenes are grounded in scientific truth. We know interbreeding occurred. We know multiple interactions happened at different times and places. We know the emotional and survival-driven motivations that shape human behavior have deep evolutionary roots. Through these lenses, the moments of contact between Homo sapiens and Ancestor X become not abstractions, but lived experiences, full of tension, curiosity, fear, desire, cooperation, and conflict. Extinction is often imagined as a dramatic ending, a species wiped out by catastrophe, climate collapse, or violent conflict. But the disappearance of Ancestor X, like the disappearance of many ancient human lineages, may not have been a single moment at all. Instead, it may have been a quiet merging, a slow dissolution of boundaries until one group no longer existed as a separate people but continued as part of another. This idea, that a species can vanish not by dying out, but by blending into the populations around it, creates a profound and haunting narrative for Ancestor X. Their story is not one of abrupt extinction, but of transformation. To understand how this happens, imagine two populations living side by side for thousands of years. Over time, climate shifts pressure both groups. Droughts reduce food. Predators become bolder. River systems change course. In such conditions, populations may shrink or disperse. As numbers dwindle, the likelihood of merging with neighboring groups increases, not out of preference, but out of necessity. Small communities cannot survive without alliances, intermarriage, and shared resources. Gradually, families intermingle. Cultures blend. Boundaries fade. And what was once a distinct lineage dissolves into another, leaving no separate identity behind. Ancestor X may have experienced precisely this fate. Their genetic traces show up in modern humans not as isolated signatures, but as integrated fragments woven throughout entire genomes. This pattern suggests repeated interbreeding over long periods, not a single event, but a gradual process in which members of their lineage became absorbed into expanding Homo sapiens populations. As our ancestors spread into new territories, they may have been better equipped culturally or technologically, allowing their numbers to grow more rapidly. Meanwhile, smaller archaic groups like Ancestor X may have struggled to maintain large, sustainable populations. The outcome was not violent conquest or sudden disappearance, it was demographic absorption. But merging into another group does not mean erasure. The DNA of Ancestor X carried adaptations shaped by environments that Homo sapiens had not yet mastered. These genetic advantages, better immune responses, improved metabolic functions, or subtle physiological traits, may have helped Homo sapiens survive in unfamiliar climates. In this sense, Ancestor X did not simply vanish, they contributed to the success of the species that absorbed them. Their extinction becomes a paradox: they disappeared, yet they endure. Still, the emotional gravity of their vanishing cannot be ignored. Imagine the final generations of Ancestor X living in landscapes where their traditions, languages, and ways of life were slowly overshadowed by those of expanding Homo sapiens groups. Their rituals, songs, and stories, whatever form they took, may have faded from collective memory. Their identity became diluted with each interbreeding event. Their small communities dwindled until they no longer existed as distinct societies. To vanish in this way is perhaps more haunting than a sudden catastrophe. It is a disappearance marked not by violence, but by quiet integration and the slow erosion of cultural uniqueness. This process also speaks to the fragility of ancient human diversity. At one time, Earth was home to multiple human species. Each had its own adaptations, its own version of intelligence, its own cultural world. As Homo sapiens expanded, we became a dominant force, not necessarily through deliberate competition, but through adaptability, innovation, and demographic strength. Smaller populations, no matter how capable, struggled to maintain identity against the rising tide of our species. The disappearance of Ancestor X becomes part of a larger trend, the gradual narrowing of the human family tree as one lineage outgrew all others. But this narrowing was never total. In absorbing Ancestor X, Homo sapiens preserved fragments of their biology. Their genes became part of the future. This raises a philosophical question: if a lineage lives on genetically, is it truly extinct? Or does its essence continue, transformed but not erased? The answer depends on how we define existence. As a distinct culture or species, Ancestor X is gone. But as a contributor to our genetic makeup, they are alive in every heartbeat of those who inherited their DNA. Their vanishing also highlights how much of prehistory is beyond our ability to reconstruct. Without fossils or artifacts, we cannot trace the cultural end of Ancestor X. Did they join Homo sapiens bands willingly, or were they absorbed gradually through isolated interbreeding? Did their languages or customs influence emerging human cultures? Or did their ways of life disappear entirely, leaving only silent fragments inside our DNA? These questions hover unanswered, reminding us that even genetic evidence has limits. We can detect the biological legacy of Ancestor X, but their cultural legacy remains hidden in darkness. What we do know is that vanishing into another species is not a failure. It is one path of survival, even if it means the end of distinct identity. The same pattern occurred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Their lineages live on through us. Ancestor X joins this group of ancestors whose physical presence disappeared but whose influence persists. Rather than imagining their extinction as loss, we can view it as a merging of histories, a blending of strengths, adaptations, and knowledge. This merging invites humility. It reminds us that Homo sapiens did not arise as an isolated pinnacle of evolution. We are not the pure descendants of a single origin, but a mosaic shaped by countless ancient encounters. Our success as a species may be due, in part, to the contributions of those who have no names, ancestors whose bones are gone and whose stories remain unfinished. Ancestor X is one of them, a people who vanished into us, shaping our biology even as their own identity dissolved into the flow of human evolution. Their disappearance is not the end of the story. It is a transition, a quiet merging that ensures their legacy endures, carried forward by generations who never knew their existence. Through this lens, vanishing becomes not oblivion, but continuity. Ancestor X may be invisible in the archaeological record, but in us, their ancient life continues to speak through the code of our bodies. The mystery of Ancestor X becomes most haunting when we confront the question that hangs over their entire story: why do we have their DNA, but not their bones? The silence around their physical existence is almost eerie. It's as if they lived their entire history in the shadows, leaving behind no tools, no campsites, no burial traditions, nothing we can touch, nothing we can hold. They left only the genetic whispers embedded in us. This silence forces us to reckon with a truth that archaeologists have always known but the broader world often forgets: the Earth does not preserve most of its past. The fossil record is not a complete archive but a series of rare accidents. Imagine the landscapes where Ancestor X may have lived. Many were regions where preservation is nearly impossible: tropical forests with acidic soils that dissolve bone quickly, floodplains where sediment layers mix and erase tracks, mountains where erosion strips away history, or river valleys that shift course and bury or scatter remains. If Ancestor X lived primarily in such environments, the odds of recovering their fossils would be astronomically low. Entire species could vanish without a trace, except for the fragments of DNA they left behind in descendants who encountered them before their disappearance. But silence can also be cultural. What if Ancestor X had burial practices that prevented long-term preservation? Some hominin species buried their dead deeply or placed them in specific environments, increasing the likelihood of fossilization. Others may have left bodies exposed to the elements, where scavengers, weather, and time erased all evidence. Or perhaps Ancestor X did not linger in one place long enough for large accumulations of remains to be fossilized. If they were highly mobile, traveling in small bands across vast distances, their bones would be scattered thinly across landscapes, reducing the chance of discovery even further. The absence of tools is equally puzzling, but not impossible to explain. Stone tools preserve well, but not all tools were stone. Many early humans relied heavily on wood, bamboo, bone, and fiber, materials that dissolve quickly. If Ancestor X lived in environments where stone was scarce or where organic tools were more practical, their technological legacy may have rotted away centuries before the first archaeologist ever dreamed of such mysteries. Even if they did make stone tools, these may remain unidentified or unexcavated. Archaeologists can uncover only what lies within a narrow slice of land touched by excavation. Meanwhile, entire continents hide countless undiscovered tools beneath forests, deserts, mountains, and cities. This silence raises another possibility: perhaps we have already found fossils of Ancestor X, but misclassified them. There are remains across Africa and Asia that defy neat categorization: skulls, jaws, and fragments with unusual combinations of features that fit no known species perfectly. These fossils sit in museum drawers, labeled but not fully understood. Some may belong to transitional populations or isolated archaic groups. Others could belong to ghost lineages like Ancestor X. Without DNA preserved in the bone, we cannot know for certain. The fossil record becomes a puzzle of incomplete pieces, some too eroded to interpret, others too ambiguous to place confidently on the evolutionary tree. This uncertainty forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge. We want clear answers, distinct species names, and tidy evolutionary charts. But the reality of ancient life is messy. Species overlapped, diverged, converged, and hybridized. Physical variation existed within populations, just as it does today. Some individuals of Ancestor X might have resembled early Homo sapiens, others may have looked more archaic. Their appearance likely shifted across regions and over time. Without more evidence, we cannot draw their faces, we cannot reconstruct their tools, and we cannot map their migrations. We are left in a space between knowledge and imagination. The silence of Ancestor X also has an emotional dimension. It reminds us that entire histories can disappear, that cultures can fade without a trace, that voices can be lost in the winds of time. Their absence in the archaeological record becomes symbolic, a metaphor for all the forgotten lives throughout human history, from unnamed prehistoric tribes to lost civilizations with no surviving records. Their story resonates because it makes us confront the fragile nature of memory itself. How much of our own world will be remembered in tens of thousands of years? What stories will future archaeologists be unable to reconstruct? And yet, even in silence, Ancestor X speaks through our DNA. This paradox creates a strange intimacy. Though we cannot see their bones, we carry their biological essence. Though we cannot hear their voices, their genetic influence shapes how our bodies function. Though we cannot locate their campsites, their interactions with our ancestors left marks that endure. It is as if a family member vanished from history, but their presence continues in the bloodlines of their descendants. This duality, absence in the earth, presence in our biology, forces us to rethink what counts as evidence. For centuries, archaeology relied on physical remains. But the discovery of ghost lineages shows that the story of humanity is far larger than what bones alone can reveal. Genetics uncovers hidden migrations, unseen populations, and forgotten encounters. The silence of Ancestor X highlights the power of this new science. It allows us to hear whispers that fossils could not preserve. This silence also challenges our emotional desire for completeness. We want every ancestor to have a name, a face, a place in history. But Ancestor X defies this longing. They remain nameless, faceless, locationless. Their essence is a shadow stitched between the sequences of our genomes, not a skeleton in a museum. Perhaps this is why their mystery feels so profound. They force us to accept that some parts of our story may always remain in darkness. And yet, their silence is not a failure, it is part of the beauty of deep time. The earth does not owe us answers. It reveals only fragments, leaving us to piece together what we can. Ancestor X teaches us humility. Their absence reminds us that we stand on a foundation built by countless ancestors whose names we will never know. Their silence teaches us that mystery is not the enemy of science, but its fuel. Reconstructing the culture of Ancestor X is like trying to understand the dreams of a vanished people. We have no bones, no hearths, no carvings, no ornaments, no shelters to study. Yet every human species leaves behind more than fossils, they leave behind patterns of behavior shaped by intelligence, emotion, creativity, and survival. Even without archaeological evidence, we can infer aspects of Ancestor X's world by studying the ecological contexts where they likely lived, the behaviors of related hominin species, and the genetic clues that hint at their adaptations. Through these fragments, we attempt to imagine their minds, their tools, their daily challenges, and the unseen worlds they carved out in deep time. Let us begin with their intelligence. Every human species capable of interbreeding with Homo sapiens possessed a level of cognition remarkably close to our own. They could navigate complex landscapes, recognize social hierarchies, remember seasonal cycles, avoid predators, and solve novel problems. Ancestor X would have shared these abilities. Their survival depended on the same fundamental pillars that supported all hominin success: communication, cooperation, tool use, and adaptability. While we cannot map their language or art, their genetic legacy implies that they thrived long enough to evolve meaningful behavioral strategies. They were not primitive shadows, they were thinking beings shaped by millennia of challenge and adaptation. What tools did they use? This question lingers at the heart of their mystery. Stone tools survive, organic tools rarely do. If Ancestor X relied mostly on bamboo, wood, or bone, their toolkits may have vanished entirely. Such materials rot quickly in humid climates or acidic soils. Many Southeast Asian hominins, like Homo floresiensis or Homo luzonensis, likely used bamboo tools extensively, which explains the scarcity of stone artifacts in their regions. If Ancestor X inhabited similar environments, their technological record would have dissolved long ago. But even without artifacts, we can infer that they made and used tools, because no known hominin species survived without them. Whether simple or sophisticated, their tools shaped how they hunted, gathered, built shelter, or protected themselves. Imagine them sharpening wooden spears by firelight, using stone flakes where appropriate but relying mostly on perishable materials. Imagine them weaving simple baskets or carrying slings made of animal sinew. Imagine them crafting digging sticks to unearth tubers or prying open termite mounds with the precision learned from generations of experience. We may never hold these objects in a museum, but their existence is almost certain. And what about fire? Fire is more than a tool, it is culture. It is warmth, protection, cooking, and a focal point for social life. Most archaic humans used fire, and it is almost inconceivable that Ancestor X did not. Picture them gathered around flames beneath a canopy of ancient stars, sharing food and stories that will never be heard again. Fire unites us across time. It was the heart of every human camp, anchoring the long nights and illuminating hidden fears. Ancestor X would have depended on fire as much as any early humans, shaping their movements, diet, and safety. Next, consider their shelters. Without bones, we cannot identify their dwelling structures, but all humans seek refuge from the elements. They may have lived in rock overhangs, built simple huts from branches, or used caves during harsh seasons. They may have followed animal herds across open plains or settled temporarily near rivers rich with fish. Their mobility patterns would have reflected environmental pressures, water scarcity, predator activity, shifting seasons. And their shelters, like their tools, may have been made of materials that vanish quickly: leaves, branches, thatched grasses, and mud. Time devours these structures effortlessly. The social world of Ancestor X is perhaps the most fascinating unknown. All hominins exhibit social complexity: bonded pairs, kin groups, cooperative hunting, division of labor, shared child rearing. Ancestor X would have had similar structures. They may have had elders whose knowledge guided their survival, caregivers who raised children communally, and leaders whose experience shaped group decisions. Infants likely depended on long-term parental care. No hominin lineage survived without strong attachment between adults and children. These emotional worlds, kindness, grief, affection, rivalry, were as real for Ancestor X as they are for us. Their communication may have involved a proto-language or full linguistic capability. Vocalization is deeply rooted in human evolution. They may have used gestures, facial expressions, rhythmic sounds, or complex speech to coordinate group tasks or share warnings. If they lived in dense forests, they may have favored low-frequency calls to carry sound through vegetation. If they lived in open savannas, sharper vocalizations may have evolved. Their voices, whatever form they took, were once part of the living soundscape of prehistoric Earth, now lost except for the descendants that speak languages shaped by countless ancient influences. Cognitive abilities also extend into symbolic thinking, though we cannot assume art or ritual without evidence. Yet it is entirely possible that Ancestor X had forms of symbolic expression that left no permanent trace: body painting with clay or ash, ephemeral carvings in wood, personal ornaments made of seeds or shells. These would degrade rapidly and never enter the archaeological record. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Human creativity is ancient, and Ancestor X would not have been an exception. Their daily life was shaped by intimate knowledge of the land. They would have understood which plants healed and which poisoned, which animals could be hunted safely, where predators lurked, how to navigate by stars or landscape features. They lived within ecosystems, not above them, and their survival depended on reading subtle environmental cues: shifts in wind, changes in bird calls, the scent of rain or fire. This ecological intelligence, often underestimated, is one of humanity's oldest and most sophisticated abilities. But what of their inner worlds, their emotions, fears, and joys? Though speculative, we can infer much from comparative anthropology and evolutionary psychology. They felt fear when predators stalked the dark. They felt grief when a child was lost or an elder died. They felt pride after a successful hunt and relief after escaping danger. They laughed, they bonded, they fought, they loved. Their lives were filled with the same emotional intensity that shapes human existence today. These unseen worlds, though forever silent, were once alive within minds that are part of our ancestral tapestry. In imagining Ancestor X's world, we uncover a deeper truth: the absence of physical evidence does not mean the absence of culture, intelligence, or humanity. Their tools may have rotted, their shelters may have collapsed, their bones may have dissolved. But their world was real. They lived, they struggled, they thrived. Their minds solved problems in landscapes that shaped their every decision. Their bodies adapted to climates we can only reconstruct abstractly. Their cultures, however simple or complex, guided them through daily life. And though their material remains are gone, their impact survives. Every inherited gene fragment carries a whisper of their world, an adaptation they forged through their behaviors, their choices, their tools, and their minds. In this way, Ancestor X has not disappeared. Their world, unseen though it is, continues to influence ours. Not all ancestors leave behind bones. Some leave behind something far more intimate, traces of themselves woven directly into our bodies. Ancestor X may be lost to the archaeological record, but their presence persists in the living fabric of our DNA. Every human alive today carries a complex mosaic of genetic contributions from multiple ancient lineages. Among these invisible threads are fragments inherited from a people we cannot see, cannot picture, and cannot place on the map, yet whose evolutionary signatures shaped key aspects of human biology. Their legacy flows quietly through us, manifesting in ways both subtle and profound. To understand this legacy, we must begin with the nature of inherited DNA. When two human lineages interbreed, their genetic material mixes and recombines in the next generation. Over many generations, this inherited DNA becomes fragmented, diluted, and scattered across the genome. Yet some pieces persist for tens of thousands of years, either by chance, by utility, or because they provided some advantage to the populations that carried them. In modern humans, these preserved fragments from Ancestor X appear in clusters associated with critical biological functions. Through these fragments, we can glimpse the adaptations, struggles, and innovations of a lineage that time tried to erase. One area where the legacy of Ancestor X appears especially visible is the immune system. Ancient humans faced constant threats from pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, each capable of devastating populations that lacked the appropriate defenses. When Homo sapiens encountered Ancestor X, interbreeding allowed for the exchange of immunological strengths. If Ancestor X had lived for millennia in a region where certain pathogens were rampant, their immune systems would have adapted accordingly. Genetic fragments linked to immune regulation, inflammation responses, or pathogen resistance may have been especially valuable to Homo sapiens entering new territories. These adaptations could have improved survival rates, enabling our species to thrive in regions that had once been biologically hostile. Metabolism is another domain where inherited DNA fragments exert influence. In some populations, genetic signatures associated with diet, fat processing, carbohydrate metabolism, or resistance to certain toxins, appear on segments that diverge too early to be attributed to modern human evolution alone. These fragments may come from Ancestor X. They reflect generations of dietary specialization, forged by the ecological demands of their environment. When Homo sapiens interbred with them, these metabolic advantages were passed on, enabling early humans to adapt more effectively to local food sources and nutritional challenges. Even physiological traits such as heat tolerance, humidity adaptation, or cold resistance may bear the fingerprints of ghost lineages. If Ancestor X lived in climates significantly different from those of emerging Homo sapiens, their bodies would have carried unique adaptations, perhaps more efficient sweating mechanisms, or altered fat distribution, or enhanced ability to withstand temperature extremes. These traits, encoded in genes later inherited by our ancestors, could have played a crucial role in allowing Homo sapiens to expand across diverse ecosystems. But not all genetic legacies are straightforward advantages. Some inherited fragments may have been neutral, conferring no particular benefit but persisting through random inheritance. Others may have once been beneficial in ancient environments but now play complicated roles in modern physiology. This complexity highlights the fluid nature of evolution. Traits that help a species in one era may become obsolete or even disadvantageous in another. And since we cannot yet fully reconstruct the environmental context of Ancestor X, some of their contributions remain mysterious, marked only by the ancient age and unusual divergence of the DNA sequences involved. The presence of these fragments also deepens our understanding of what it means to be human. We like to imagine ourselves as the direct descendants of a clean, linear evolutionary path, but our genome tells a different story, one of mingling, merging, absorbing, adapting. The genetic legacy of Ancestor X reveals that Homo sapiens is not the product of a single origin, but of countless interactions with other hominin species. Each encounter added complexity to our ancestry, enriching our biological diversity in ways we are still unraveling. This layered ancestry also challenges the concept of a pure human lineage. No such thing exists. Every population on Earth carries traces of ancient hominins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and ghost lineages like Ancestor X. These contributions do not dilute human identity, they define it. They demonstrate that humanity itself is a shared inheritance, not an isolated branch. Our species is a tapestry of ancient lives, stitched together through time by encounters shaped by curiosity, survival, and circumstance. The genetic legacy of Ancestor X also illuminates the resilience of life. Even though their bones have not endured, and their culture remains invisible, their biological influence persists in ways they could never have imagined. Their genes traveled through generations, crossing landscapes, merging with other lineages, surviving ice ages, migrations, famines, and environmental upheavals. Today, they live on in millions of people, silent, unacknowledged, but undeniably present. These legacies invite a moment of humility. We often think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, but our success is built on the foundations laid by others, ancestors whose names we cannot speak, whose faces we cannot draw. Ancestor X contributed to our immune defenses, our physiology, our capacity to survive in certain regions. They shaped our evolution just as much as we shaped theirs during the encounters that blended our lineages. Without them, parts of humanity might not exist as they do today. The genetic fragments of Ancestor X also whisper philosophical truths. They remind us that extinction is not always abrupt or absolute. A species can vanish physically but persist through the bodies of its descendants. Their disappearance is not erasure, it is absorption. They live on inside us not as memories, but as molecules, tiny, ancient instructions that help build the bodies we inhabit. And perhaps this is the most extraordinary part of their legacy: Ancestor X survives not in bones or artifacts, but in us. The fact that we carry pieces of their biology makes every one of us a living archive of ancient worlds. Our cells hold stories older than civilization, older than writing, older than our collective imagination. Each inherited fragment is a letter in a forgotten script, a message from a species that time tried to silence. Ancestor X may never be found in full form. Their skull may remain forever buried, their tools forever rotted, their shelters forever lost. But their genetic legacy ensures they are not entirely gone. They shaped our species, and in doing so, they transcended extinction. Parts of them walk the earth still, inside you, inside me, inside anyone who carries even the faintest echo of their ancient DNA. For most of modern history, the idea of what it means to be human has rested on a comforting illusion, that Homo sapiens is singular, exceptional, and distinct, rising alone from a neat line of ancestors that led directly to us. This narrative places our species at the center, separate from the others, smarter, more adaptable, destined to inherit the earth. But the story revealed by genetics, and especially by the existence of Ancestor X, shatters this illusion. It shows that humanity was never a single point of origin, but a mosaic assembled from many lineages, many species, many forgotten worlds. Our definition of human must widen, deepen, and stretch into places it has never reached before. To rethink humanity, we must confront the truth that we were never alone. Our ancestors shared the planet with at least half a dozen other human species, each intelligent, each adapted to their environments, each possessing abilities shaped by millions of years of evolution. Neanderthals mastered survival in Ice Age Europe. Denisovans thrived in high-altitude environments where oxygen was scarce. Homo floresiensis, tiny in stature but skilled in tool use, persisted on isolated islands for thousands of years. Homo naledi, with its startling combination of ancient and modern traits, lived long after our species emerged. And somewhere alongside them, silent and unknown, lived Ancestor X. These species were not primitive versions of us, they were different expressions of humanity. They had their own strengths, their own challenges, their own interpretations of the world. When we met them, we did not meet animals, we met other humans. And in some cases, we joined with them, forming families, sharing knowledge, merging lineages. Our genome is proof of these intimate exchanges. The boundaries we draw between us and them are lines written by modern minds, not by ancient reality. Ancestor X forces us to question what qualifies as human. Is it tool use? Many species used tools. Is it language? Many hominins likely had complex vocal communication. Is it culture? Even Neanderthals made art, buried their dead, and created symbolic objects. Is it survival? Ancestor X survived long enough to contribute to our DNA. They thrived in environments that challenged early Homo sapiens. They adapted biologically in ways that enriched our species when we interbred. By any meaningful measure, they lived as humans live, intelligently, socially, emotionally, creatively. Their existence reveals that humanity is not defined by a single lineage, but by connection. To be human is to belong to a web of ancestry far richer than we once believed. It means carrying the legacy of many species that shaped our evolution physically, mentally, and culturally. It means embracing the idea that human extends beyond the boundaries we have drawn around Homo sapiens. The category is porous, fluid, and deeply intertwined with lineages that no longer exist as independent species. Ancestor X also forces us to rethink the linear model of evolution. For decades, diagrams portrayed human evolution as a ladder, simple at the bottom, complex at the top. But ladders imply inevitability, hierarchy, and singular direction. Reality is nothing like this. Evolution is a branching tree, a sprawling, entangled network where multiple lineages coexist, diverge, and sometimes merge. The disappearance of Ancestor X is not a step toward Homo sapiens dominance, it is one branch that ended while others continued. And the fact that they live on within our genes shows that extinction does not always erase influence. This new understanding also challenges the idea of human uniqueness. For centuries, we claimed qualities like empathy, creativity, and symbolic thought as ours alone. Yet the archaeological and genetic records show that these capacities were shared across species. Neanderthals cared for injured members of their groups. Denisovans passed on adaptations essential for high-altitude life. Early African ghost lineages contributed immune advantages and other biological strengths. Ancestor X added its own invisible threads. Our species is unique not because it stands apart, but because it stands upon the contributions of many others. Philosophically, this reality is profound. It means that our ancestors were not simply Homo sapiens, they were a constellation of species whose fates interconnected. We are not the pure descendants of one lineage but the final expression of a rich evolutionary tapestry. This challenges the narrative of isolation and superiority that often accompanies discussions of human evolution. Instead, it suggests humility. It reminds us that our success was not earned alone. It grew from shared worlds, shared genes, and shared struggles. It also forces us to reconsider the emotional dimension of ancestry. When we think of our family tree, we imagine parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. But behind them stretches a chain of ancestors numbering in the billions. And among those billions are individuals from ghost species, humans whose names are lost, whose cultures vanished, but whose blood flows within us. This idea reshapes identity itself. It broadens our sense of belonging. It expands our understanding of kinship beyond species lines. Ancestor X, though invisible, becomes part of that kinship. Their genetic traces remind us that the concept of pure humanity is a myth. Every human alive today is a mosaic of ancient worlds. Within our cells reside fragments from species we have not yet fully identified, species that shaped us without leaving their own stories behind. This realization dissolves the rigid lines between human and other. It reveals that our species is not an isolated pinnacle but a collective inheritance built by many who came before. Rethinking human also shifts how we view the future. If our identity is rooted in diversity and shared ancestry, then understanding and preserving diversity, biological, cultural, ecological, becomes essential. The lessons of ghost species warn us that extinction erases possibilities, that lost lineages cannot be replaced. But they also show that those who disappear still shape the world long after their bodies turn to dust. Ancestor X teaches us that even unseen ancestors matter, that surviving is only one form of legacy, and that influence can outlast existence. Ultimately, to rethink what it means to be human is to embrace a more complex, more beautiful truth. Humanity is not a single species acting alone. It is a symphony of ancestral voices, some familiar, some forgotten, some never fully known. We are the product of encounters, mergers, experiments, and accidents. We are woven from threads that began long before Homo sapiens had a name. Ancestor X is one of those threads, an unseen contributor, a silent partner in our evolutionary journey. Their story invites us to see ourselves not as the end of a line, but as part of a vast, ongoing conversation written in biology, shaped by relationships, and carried forward through time. For all we know about Ancestor X, through scattered genetic shadows and faint biological echoes, most of their story still remains out of reach. They exist on the edge of perception, half seen through mathematical models and fragments of DNA, waiting for science to illuminate the rest of their world. The mystery of Ancestor X is not a closed chapter, it is an unfolding frontier. As technology advances and new methods emerge, our ability to uncover lost species grows stronger. The next few decades may reveal answers we cannot yet imagine, transforming this ghost lineage into a fully recognized branch of humanity's evolutionary tree. The most promising breakthroughs may come from one of the newest tools in paleoanthropology, sediment DNA. This technique allows scientists to extract genetic material directly from soil, even when no bones or artifacts remain. Dust, dirt, cave floors, riverbeds, all of these can hold microscopic fragments of ancient DNA shed from skin cells, hair, bodily fluids, or decayed remains. Already, sediment DNA has revealed the presence of Neanderthals and Denisovans in caves where no fossils were found. It has shown that hominins occupied environments far more often than previously believed. If Ancestor X ever lived in similar habitats, traces of their DNA may still lie hidden in untouched layers of soil, waiting to be uncovered by a new generation of researchers. Proteomics, the study of ancient proteins, adds another dimension to this search. Unlike DNA, proteins can survive in conditions where genetic material rapidly decays, especially in hot or humid environments. Proteins extracted from ancient teeth, bones, and even sediments can provide evolutionary information, revealing relationships between species long after their DNA has disappeared. This field is still expanding, but it holds immense potential for identifying ghost lineages like Ancestor X. A single tooth fragment, stripped of its DNA but carrying preserved proteins, could finally attach a face to the lineage we know only through genetic divergence. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are also becoming powerful tools in paleoanthropology. Algorithms can simulate evolutionary scenarios, analyze massive datasets, and detect subtle patterns invisible to the human eye. These tools refine our understanding of ancient population structure, identify genetic anomalies with greater accuracy, and model possible evolutionary paths for lost species. As AI grows more sophisticated, it may help reconstruct the likely traits, behaviors, and habitats of Ancestor X, even in the absence of physical remains. We may one day generate predictive models of their appearance and culture based on genetic clues and comparisons with related species. Fossil discoveries continue to reshape our understanding as well. New cave systems, river deposits, and remote landscapes remain unexplored across Africa and Asia, the very regions where Ancestor X likely lived. Many groundbreaking fossil discoveries have occurred by chance: a hiker stumbling on a fragment, miners uncovering a jaw, archaeologists re-examining old collections and identifying traits previously overlooked. Any new specimen, even a tiny one, an isolated molar, a partial jaw, a skull fragment, could match the deep divergence seen in genetic signatures and confirm the existence of Ancestor X as a physical species. Such a discovery would be monumental, bridging the gap between genetic ghost and tangible ancestor. Improved genomic sequencing will also refine our understanding of how much Ancestor X contributed to modern humans. As technology advances, we can sequence more genomes from diverse populations, particularly in regions where ancient admixture is likely to have occurred. Better sampling reveals clearer patterns: how much DNA came from which lineages, when mixing occurred, and whether multiple ghost lineages were involved. We may find that what we call Ancestor X is not a single lineage at all but a cluster of related archaic humans whose interactions with Homo sapiens varied across time and geography. Climate science contributes to this future as well. By reconstructing ancient environments with greater precision, researchers can identify areas where unknown hominins were most likely to survive. These reconstructions guide archaeological surveys, helping pinpoint regions where fossils of Ancestor X might still lie buried. The more accurately we understand the climate cycles of the past, the more effectively we can predict where to look next. Yet the greatest breakthroughs may come from a shift in how we think about our own ancestry. As researchers expand the concept of what evidence matters, not just bones, but DNA, proteins, sediments, and statistical patterns, the definition of discovery evolves. Recognizing ghost lineages requires embracing the invisible, acknowledging that the human evolutionary story extends far beyond what traditional archaeology can uncover. This mindset encourages scientists to search in new places, ask new questions, and collaborate across disciplines in unprecedented ways. One day, we may find a fossil that matches the genetic signature of Ancestor X exactly, ending decades of speculation. Or we may discover multiple fossils that, when analyzed, reveal that Ancestor X was a population with internal diversity as complex as Neanderthals or Denisovans. We may even discover that their lineage lasted longer than previously believed, that they survived in remote corners of the world while Homo sapiens spread globally. Each possibility opens a doorway into a deeper understanding of how our species came to be. But even if no fossil ever emerges, the future of uncovering Ancestor X remains bright. Their genetic legacy proves they existed. Their influence on our biology proves they mattered. And the tools of modern science ensure that their story will continue unfolding, bit by bit, model by model, discovery by discovery. The ghost that once hovered at the edge of our understanding grows more solid with each new study, each new dataset, each new scientific revolution. Ancestor X stands on the threshold of visibility. The next discovery, whether a molecule in the dirt, a protein in an ancient tooth, or a fossil in an unexplored cave, could finally bring them into the light. And when that happens, we will not simply be discovering a species. We will be rediscovering a lost part of ourselves. When we speak of Ancestor X, of ghost lineages and vanished species who shaped us without leaving their names behind, we enter a realm not just of science but of ethics, memory, and responsibility. These lost ancestors force us to reconsider the way we tell the human story, whose lives are remembered, whose stories are preserved, and whose existence fades into silence. In contemplating their disappearance, we confront not only the fragility of prehistoric life but the deep moral significance of acknowledging beings who lived, felt, struggled, and contributed to what humanity is today. Ancient hominins were not abstractions. They were living creatures with fears, desires, bonds, hopes, and griefs. They raised children, mourned the dead, formed alliances, weathered storms, hunted and gathered, and moved across landscapes filled with danger and beauty. Their lives unfolded with meaning, even if that meaning has vanished from the physical record. To treat them as mere footnotes, or worse, as irrelevant because they did not leave behind grand monuments, is to deny the richness of their humanity. They were not evolutionary mistakes. They were part of the living world that shaped the one we inhabit now. Ancestor X, perhaps more than any other lineage, confronts us with the urgency of honoring lost histories. Their entire existence is known only through fragments hidden inside modern genomes. There are no cave paintings for them, no carved tools to admire, no skeletal remains to assemble. Their story is a ghost story, not just because they left so little behind, but because we must summon them from silence through imagination and science working together. This absence challenges us to develop empathy for worlds we can never fully reconstruct. It invites humility, recognizing that science, for all its power, can only reveal so much, and that the past is larger than any method we use to study it. There is a moral dimension in recognizing that these ancient lineages shaped our bodies and possibly our cultures. Their contributions helped Homo sapiens survive in harsh climates, resist pathogens, and thrive in unfamiliar environments. They gave parts of themselves to us, not metaphorically, but literally. Their DNA flows through millions of living people today. We carry their endurance, their adaptations, their strengths. To acknowledge their existence is to acknowledge a debt. We did not reach the present alone. This recognition also challenges long-held ideas of human supremacy. For centuries, our species has written history in a way that glorifies Homo sapiens as the inevitable pinnacle of evolution. But the more we uncover about ancient hominins, the more this narrative erodes. We did not triumph because we were destined to. We survived through chance, adaptability, and help, genetic help, from those who came before and beside us. To dismiss Ancestor X or any other archaic lineage as primitive or lesser is to misunderstand the deep interdependence that shaped human evolution. There is also an ethical responsibility in how we interpret extinction. When a species disappears, it becomes easy to think of it as a natural outcome, a biological inevitability. But behind each extinction lies a loss of knowledge, culture, potential, and identity. The disappearance of Ancestor X represents the disappearance of a worldview, a perspective on existence, and a way of being human that we can never fully understand. Their extinction may not have been dramatic, no volcanic eruption or deadly plague may have wiped them out. Instead, their fate may have been a quiet blending into other populations, a slow decline in numbers, a merging of identities until nothing distinctive remained. This kind of extinction is subtle, almost invisible. But it is extinction nonetheless. And it carries a weight of sorrow, because it speaks to how human diversity, a diversity once wide and astonishing, has narrowed over time. Recognizing this loss matters. It teaches us that history is not only the story of victors or survivors. It is also the story of those who disappeared, those whose lives shaped the world even though their names did not endure. It reminds us that every lineage, every variant of humanity, deserves acknowledgement, not because they led to us, but because they lived their own valuable lives. There is another layer to this moral weight, the way we respond to the incompleteness of their story. It is tempting to fill gaps with speculation or romanticization, but doing so risks imposing our own biases onto the past. Instead, we must hold a balance between imagination and restraint, between honoring their existence and respecting the limits of our knowledge. In this way, the mystery of Ancestor X becomes a lesson in intellectual humility. We must learn to say, "We do not know," and let that not be a failure but an invitation for deeper exploration. Their existence also offers a reflection on modern humanity. Today, debates about identity, ethnicity, and belonging often rest on the illusion of pure origins. Ancestor X shatters that illusion. They show that our lineage is not a straight line but a web of interconnected histories. They remind us that to be human is to be mixed, merged, blended. There is no single story of humanity, only many stories woven together. This truth carries moral weight because it pushes us toward compassion. If our very DNA is shaped by multiple species, then the differences among modern human populations are far too shallow to justify division or hierarchy. We are all mosaics of ancient worlds. We are all inheritors of forgotten lineages. Ancestor X also highlights the fragility of cultural memory. What we remember of the past depends on what survives, and survival is often random. A bone preserved in the right layer of soil becomes a museum artifact. Another bone, exposed to rain or scavengers, disappears forever. Entire civilizations have vanished due to war, climate change, or time. Entire species have left no trace except the ones hidden in the genomes of others. This fragility calls for care in how we preserve the histories we can still touch and for reverence for those we cannot. In honoring the lost, we also honor ourselves. By acknowledging the existence and importance of Ancestor X, we acknowledge that our species is not alone in its story. We are part of a continuum, a family of ancient beings whose paths crossed, intertwined, and dissolved. This awareness deepens our connection to the human experience as a whole. It grounds us. It humbles us. It expands our understanding of identity, belonging, and kinship. The moral weight of lost histories is not a burden but a guide. It teaches us to approach our past with empathy, to view extinct hominins not as curiosities but as participants in our shared story. It urges us to respect the gaps in our knowledge while celebrating the discoveries that bring us closer to truth. And it reminds us that even when a lineage disappears from the world, its influence may endure in ways we are only beginning to understand. Ancestor X, though silent, speaks through us. Their history, fragmented, invisible, incomplete, carries a moral lesson, that every life, every species, every culture matters. That memory is fragile. That existence is intertwined. And that honoring the forgotten is part of honoring ourselves.